Hey everyone, this is Jay from Project Unity, and tonight I'm speaking with Melinda Leslie. Melinda is a UFO experiencer and researcher who's been in the research game for over 20 years. She's spoken at numerous conferences and operates UFO tours for the public out in Sedona, Arizona. Melinda's research has been focused primarily on the nature of her own experiences and the experiences of others with what are known as military abductions, or MILAB for short. The idea, at least to my understanding, that covert groups in either government or perhaps private contractor teams are performing abductions in order to do various tests on specific human subjects. Now, this is a category of study that draws controversy within an already controversial topic such as UFOs. So my hope for today is that we can just kind of unpack this particular area of research, separate the fact from the fiction, and to also hear from someone who has had personal experiences with what they believe to be a form of military or covert human abduction. Now, this is not an area of the UFO subject in which I have a whole lot of background knowledge, and so I'm looking forward to learning a thing or two tonight alongside all of you. Now, this is not the first time Melinda and I have spoken either. We have done panel talks together with Grant Cameron and others, and we communicate quite often. I consider her a colleague and a friend, and so without further delay, Melinda, welcome onto the channel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jay, for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. I was so glad when you said you wanted to do this with me, because I really love how you do your interviews, and I knew we could do the subject matter justice to go a little deeper than I often do in other interviews. So again, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you are most welcome. I've been really excited about this. And when I put it out there, I got quite a few comments saying that people were excited to hear from you.
Good, good.
I just wanted to kind of kick this off lightly before we jump into MILAB, because you spend a lot of your time doing UFO tours out in Sedona, Arizona. How many have you done now? Because last I heard it was like over 1,000. Is that right?
Yes.
Oh my God. All right. So yeah,
Yeah,
please tell us what happened.
I'm actually at 1,239. So
Wow.
that's how many I've done. Yeah, 1,239 tours.
So
I always jokingly say, but who's counting,
exactly?
right?
Yeah.
And I have one scheduled for tonight and all the next couple of nights. So
what exactly do you get up to on the tours?
Well, we're using military night vision goggles, and which will allow you to see like 50,000 times more light than you see with your naked eyes. And we're going, all of Sedona is a hotspot for sightings. And then we go up on a hill. So we're up, high. We have a nice, 360 view all around. And we see real unknowns. We've seen fully structured craft. Now, I usually tell my clients, don't expect to see that, but we've seen 39 fully structured crafts. So when you say large triangles, discs, classic UFO shape, flying saucer disc, large, huge black triangles, definitely cylinders and big boomerang or V shapes, and seed shapes, tic-tac shapes, all the above. So seeds, ovals, boomerangs, big spherical shapes. When we've seen structure, we've had a wide variety. And 4 of the times we've had structured craft, we've had military jets come in and follow or chase the items. And so that's always very exciting. So yeah, I actually guarantee sightings your money back. We always see them. It's really fun.
Well, I wanted to get into that whole thing about you guarantee sightings and you always see them. I'm also wondering, just from that, have you been fortunate enough to capture any good images or video of anything out there over these tours?
I mean, often with sightings, you're caught up in the moment, and I don't always have the equipment, but someone will whip out a cell phone sometimes. And a friend of mine who has a night vision attachment, anyways, for a camera, she's come out and filmed. Another gentleman I know has a night vision video camera. He's filmed with me. So we have caught a few things. One time we got a big U-shaped craft with a F-18 military jet chasing it. If I give you a piece and you want to edit it in here, we can. You can show people that.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there a place for people to see these online already, or?
Yeah. Boy, let's put it this way. I'll either provide you the link if you want to embed it here in this actual video. I'm happy with that. Or If you don't and you want to link to it at the bottom, I'll give you the link.
Yeah, I'll probably, well, if you can send the link afterwards, I'll put it in the description box
Yeah,
below. So
yeah, we'll put
anyone
in the
listening
description.
now,
Yeah.
we'll pop it in the description box.
Yeah, yeah, I'll give that. There may be some other things that come up in our discussion that I can give you the links to as well.
Right.
So,
And the other thing I wanted to ask you as well is that with the guaranteed sightings, is there
yes.
any sort of contact protocol going on here, or is it just
No, I'll tell you why. It's not necessary. So,
well, the intention's already there, right?
Yeah. The intention's already there. And Sedona is such a hot spot for sightings. All you got to do here is look up the military night vision, allowing you to see, like, 50,000 times more light than you see with your naked eye, allows you to see like 50,000 times more stars than you see with your naked eye. And so we're just seeing stuff that's already here. It's about Sedona. It's not about me or the group. It's about Sedona.
Right.
And so this place, they're here, and you look up, and people who live here have sightings all the time. This is a known hotspot. It's very common for people who live here to have sightings. You gather any 20 residents together, and at least 15 of those 20 will have had sightings. That's how common it is. And I have people walk up to me all the time here in Sedona, everything from the servers in the restaurant and the checkout people at the supermarket and everything, and they all share their sightings with me. It's real common. And then, like I said, we're using the night vision goggles, and we're up on the hill and we're looking up. I mean, it is just always here. I never know what we're going to get on a tour. Luckily, we see some stuff every time. Granted, a lot of it's up high. And I want everyone to know, when we go out, I spend a full half hour talking about what you're going to see, not going to see, all about drones. Well, first off, they're illegal over Sedona at night, so that rules that out. They're totally illegal in our skies. Secondly, all about satellites, all about the Starlink, Elon Musk Starlink satellites. Those are real obvious when you see them. I also have apps to tell me what's there, but it is not even necessary. It's real obvious usually when you get satellites. If you have something stop, turn, change direction, zigzag, but my clients always say, looks like a drunk driver, something not flying quite straight. If you have things in formations of 3 and 4, come on, the Starlinks are a long formation of many objects, but when you get things in 2 and 2 in a formation, like 4 or 3, in a triangle formation, come on, so yeah, we get that kind of stuff all the time. And like I said, we've had structured craft 39 times. So, I never know what we're going to get. Luckily, we always see sightings. Some, I have kind of an arbitrary 1 through 10 scale. We're always hitting like a 5 or 6, at least on my tours. The only thing I'm going to give a 10 is when we have structured craft. But we have a lot of nights that I put at 7, 8, 9, like the majority of nights, so we see those formations. We see great big large amber lights. For any of you following stuff on Facebook much these days and on Twitter, you might see Chris Bledsoe near his home photographing these big amber lights. I chuckle when I see his videos. That's like 1 out of every 3 tours. It's that common that we see that. So, it's really fun. And people can go and read my reviews on TripAdvisor under Center for the New Age. I have hundreds of reviews, and I just had someone from 2 nights ago send me a personal thing saying, "Oh my God, it was so incredible," and they sent me this lovely note. So yeah, I'm blessed by my clients. I'm blessed by the number of sightings, and there you go.
Well, that's awesome. I want to kind of know what actually started your initial interest in the topic, because did this all start with your own abduction experience, or were you already interested? Right, okay, so it started with that. In that case, can we jump into the beginning origin story of you getting into this?
Yeah. I mean, I know people listening want to get us to get to the MILABS, and that we can fill the whole time with that research. But
well, I want to introduce anyone who doesn't know too much about you already. I want to introduce you properly.
I understand, and I'm good with that. This is like, shut up, Melinda, let the host direct you.
No, of course not. I just want to get the most out of you, Melinda.
So, everything started with my UFO interest. I had a big interest in metaphysics and consciousness studies and everything. Going paranormal, metaphysics, conscious studies, really my whole life. And then taking off with, because I also do readings, psychic readings, and mediumship, and all that really started it'd been going on my whole life, but the real kickoff into everything was high school. And I graduated from high school in 80. And then, so 1989, kind of everything changed for ufology in a big way with the breaking of what we now know as the Bob Lazar story.
Right, right.
And so, without going into tremendous background, because hopefully a lot of your viewers are familiar with that, and if not, there's all sorts of places on the internet where they can get familiar with that. And certainly Jeremy Corbell's, award-winning movie about it. But Lazard had extreme harassment, confided in someone who had become harassment at work. He had no desire whatsoever to go public, confided in a friend of his, Gene Huff, who was a real estate broker. Gene Huff said, look, I don't know anything about this subject, but I just helped appraise a house for a very famous UFO researcher, and that was John Lear, son of the inventor of the Learjet, and very famous in this field. Controversial, but very famous, certainly going back in ufology quite a ways. And he said, look, I don't know anything about this, but you need to meet this guy, just appraise his house for. And so when he met, Lazar met Lear, and Lear said, can you prove this? Lazar took Lear and Huff multiple times out to Highway 375 in Nevada, down Groom Road, the back entrance to the base, and showed them the test flights that he knew were happening of both discs that were in our possession, and possibly reverse engineered technology as well. So he took him there, showed him these test flights. And anyways, the reason I brought that up, relating to my background, is Lear then went on a very popular radio program being broadcast out of Las Vegas at the time called Billy Goodman's The Happening. A friend of mine in Southern California who had similar paranormal interest to me, also had an interest in Native American studies, had fallen upon this radio show because Billy was interviewing a bunch of Native American elders. All of a sudden, one night they switch, and here it's John Lear. And at the time, again, the infamous researcher Bill Cooper, who was friends with Lear at the time, they were both going on this radio program. Lear had taken Cooper out there as well and had seen these sightings out there. And these guys were going on this program talking about it. She stumbled upon this. She said, Melinda, listen to this. This is really interesting. Tell you the truth, I could have cared less back then. But she said, look, I got to have someone to talk to about this. You're involved in paranormal and metaphysical things with me, so please, listen. And so I started listening, and it was fascinating. Well, all of a sudden, the producer of the show said, we have so many people calling in saying, we're on Highway 375. Can we go see this stuff? So she decided that they were going to rent 2 buses, meet in a parking lot in Vegas at a casino, and drive the 2.5 hours out to Rachel, Nevada, and out to Highway 375 and what was known back then as the infamous black mailbox down Medlin Ranch Road at the highway, which is a point in the land where you're able to be up high enough to kind of see level with the top of the mountain range between you and Groom Lake, the infamous Groom Lake, and the longest runway in the world where they test fly all sorts of advanced aircraft. And so they rented 2 buses. They said, join us, go out there. Well, we didn't want to go on the buses, but we were going to follow in the cars. They said people could meet up with us. We left Southern California, where we were living at the time, and drove the 5 hours to Vegas. Well, we got a late start, so we knew we were going to be about 2 hours. Your image just froze. Are you okay? You there? Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, all good, all good.
I'm getting a notice, internet connection. Okay, internet connection wasn't stable on my end.
Oh, so I'm hearing you perfectly, don't worry.
Tell me if you need me to repeat anything because of that.
I will.
Okay, so sometimes it's garbled on my end. If enough people at the center are on, then it can slow it down. So here, anyways, long story short, we went out there and followed the buses. We were behind the buses by 2 hours. We get out there. They've already been out there for 2 hours. A lot of other cars joined up. I'm thinking there were like 40 cars plus 2 buses filled with people. And we had amazing sightings, mind-blowing UFO sightings. We were so blown away. We took the trip, my friends and I that went out there with me, 2 weeks later and about a month after that. So this was roughly September and October of 1989. We did 3 back-to-back trips out to Area 51, had amazing sightings. And something about that was like inserting a key and turning it in my head, because I started to have memories come forward of childhood, teenage, and young adult alien abduction experiences. Some of those were just spontaneous recall, and other things were coming forward in dreams at night. Quick example. My grandmother had a place in Yucca Valley, California, out in the desert, in an area we now know as Landers, and what was once the infamous Giant Rock and Landers, which were very famous for sightings in the 50s and interaction contact experiences between George Adamski and others in the 50s. Very, very famous. My grandmother thought all those people were nuts. She wasn't into that. But as kids, we'd go out there and stuff, and as a family. And so we were staying out at my grandmother's, and I was put down one nap. I was 5 years old, put down for a nap in the afternoon. Everyone went off to see the movies, to go to the movies. They came home and said, Melinda, how was your nap? Well, I had this experience where I thought little kids had come to the bedroom window. Well, my grandmother lived out in the middle of nowhere. Her closest neighbor was like 50 yards away, was a single old guy with, no joke, like a truck on cinder blocks. He owned 2 donkeys in the yard. And no joke. And the closest neighbor was far away. And there were certainly no little kids. It was all really old people, you know. And so so I always had this memory of little kids coming to the bedroom window, my wanting to go play with them. The adult who had stayed behind to babysit me had fallen asleep on the couch. I snuck out past them and went outside to play with these kids. Well, when everyone came home from the movies, they said, Melinda, how was your nap? And I said, I went out and played with these little kids. And everyone got on my case, my older siblings, I think my cousins were even there. And they said, Melinda, don't be silly. Grandma lives in the middle of nowhere. There's no little kids anywhere. She's like 3 miles away from anybody. You know,
Right.
she's in the middle of nowhere, and it's 102 degrees outside. No one came to your bedroom window. You must have dreamt it. And I'm like, no, I went out inside, played with the kids. And they turn, of course, to the adult that's supposed to be babysitting me. And the adult's like, she's been asleep on the bed the whole time. Okay. Well, suddenly, after having all these sightings out at Area 51, I'm remembering that event, but it wasn't little kids at the bedroom window. It was gray aliens. They'd knocked out the adult who was asleep, and I was taken out and had an abduction, and actually got a scoop mark on my leg that I have to this day, that I got at that time. And then same thing when I was 12 years old, but this time staying in a little motel in Yucca Valley. And I wasn't feeling well. Everyone went on a day hike that day. Long story short, I had another experience. And I always thought, my family had been gone all day. I thought they'd only been gone for like an hour. They'd come back. I hadn't been feeling good. I had gone outside to walk around, get fresh air, come back, use the bathroom in the motel room. Everybody came back, and I said, oh, it was too hot. You canceled. They were going to go on a picnic and a day hike to what's called Joshua Tree National Monument. And I said, oh, you're going to go, you know, you didn't go. It's too hot. You decided not to. And they're like, Melinda, what are you talking about? We've been gone all day. I said, no, you haven't. You've been gone like an hour, maybe at tops. And I was 12. I had a good sense of time. And they're like, Linda, you must have fallen asleep. I said, no, I wish. I never slept. I don't feel good. I wish, you know, I went outside to get fresh air, and I came back, used the restroom, and you guys are back. And they said, Melinda, we've been gone all day. We've been gone like 6 hours. And I'm like, that's crazy. So now I know I had missing time. And again, after all these sightings out at Area 51, I'm having a dream at night recalling that whole event. But when I went outside for a walk, I walked out into the desert, down into a ravine. There was a landed craft, and I got another scoop mark on my leg. That experience.
Wait, was that when you were asleep, or you actually saw that craft in?
No, it was daytime. I went outside for a walk, and there was a landed craft, and I was taken on board.
Oh
And
my
that
God.
memory of that came forward in dreams, that I was dreaming at night. But I always knew that I had had that experience of being sick, staying at the hotel room. Everyone took off to go on a day hike, left me there because I wasn't feeling well enough. And they said, if you get feeling better, they left me food because they'd taken a picnic lunch. So they left me a sandwich. They said, if you get feeling better, here's food. If you really get feeling better, go in the pool. There's, you know, so motel with a pool. And so after having all those sightings at Area 51, I had a dream at night, and now, 1989, where I'm recalling that whole thing. But when I went outside to get fresh air, I walked out into the desert, and there was a landed craft, and I was taken on board. And I said, this is crazy. I actually thought I was like losing my mind. A researcher I'd met out at Area 51 had recommended a regression therapist who also was a full-fledged PhD doctor of psychology, Dr. Deborah Troncalli, and who's now unfortunately passed away. But she was the first one I started working with, and I got regressed over these experiences. And sure enough, there were whole abduction events there. And I had scars on my legs from both of those accounts. And then I started to have current real-time experiences. Just to give a quick example, because again, we're eating up time on alien abduction stuff, and I could easily spend a day.
Well, this is interesting stuff, so please keep going.
Well, a lot of people have heard me say this part, but okay, so just jumping ahead. A roommate of mine, very early 1990, I had two roommates, Scott and Gail. Those are their real names. Scott was out of town on business. Gail was home, and we had a late night discussion. Her and a friend of hers were going through something difficult. She wanted to ask me about it. Just, roommates, friends talking, sitting in her room on her bed talking. And I said, oh my God, I had a deadline. I was an office manager at the time. I had a deadline on a project the next day. And I said, I got to get to bed right away. I go to bed. I'm sitting in my bed. I sat the alarm. My covers were up, up to my waist. I sat the alarm. And because of this discussion we had, and knowing I had to, from my alarm was going to go off in 6.5 hours. And it was supposed to go to bed earlier. It was later, and I was kicking myself. But I said, okay, if I fall asleep right now, I'm doing this to my hand, like, that I'll get 6.5 hours of sleep. So I sat on my bed, did a quick little deep breathing exercise just to relax, go back on my elbows, go to turn off the light. And I had just set the alarm, and I double checked the alarm. I still do that now. We all do, I think, double, triple check an alarm, especially if you got to get up. I had a deadline on a project in the office I was managing at the time. I reached to turn off the light, and it was 2.5 hours later looking at the alarm. And there's no way I was sitting on my bed for 2.5 hours. I would have said I was sitting on my bed for 2.5 minutes tops doing this little deep breathing thing. I'm like, oh my God, what has happened in 2.5 hours? And I couldn't get this image out of my head of 3 gray aliens standing next to the bed. And the one in the middle was like holding this device. And I'm like, this is crazy. So I got the image out, I finally calmed myself down, got under the covers, and fell asleep. My alarm goes off, waking the dead like 3 hours later, and I crawl into work, get through the day, get home. I'm making myself dinner in the kitchen, and my roommate Gail goes, what happened? She's there too, making herself dinner. And she said, what happened to you last night? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, after our discussion, she couldn't sleep, so she sat up in bed reading. And she said, I sat up in bed reading for hours and hours. I kept trying to sleep. I couldn't. She goes, I sat in bed reading, and I heard noises downstairs. We lived in a 2-story townhouse in Tustin, California, for those familiar with that area, near the 55 freeway in Tustin. And she kept going downstairs. Nothing was there, but she came up and noticed my light was on in my room. There's a gap like this under the door, good inch or more under the door. And she said, I could clearly see your light on. So she said, I had to know if it was you I heard downstairs. And it was like 3 a.m. So she goes, I knocked on your door, no answer. And I have a small room, and my head would only be like 5 feet from the door, right? She pounds on my door, no answer. She pounds harder, no answer. So she goes in my room. I'm not there. Okay, I never left my room. Okay, she goes in my room. I'm not there. She goes back downstairs. I'm not there. I'm nowhere to be found. She opens the front door. We had a carport, covered parking, and she looks, my car's there. So I hadn't driven anywhere. And she goes, Melinda had a deadline for work. Where is she at 3 a.m? So she goes in my room and witnesses I was gone during my missing time. She goes back, sits in her room, sitting on her bed, has the light on, little light on next to her, reading, hoping she's going to hear me, because right outside her door is the stairs going down, and at the base of the stairs is the front door to our townhouse. She's hoping she's going to hear me come in any moment. She sees a flash of light in the hallway, expecting to see me. She's fully conscious, sitting up in bed reading. Stepping out of the darkness of the hallway, out of this flash of light, stands in the entrance to her room, a gray alien. She said it came just past the handle on her door. Well, door handle is about 3.5 feet. So she figured this thing was roughly just about 4 feet tall.
Wow.
And it stared right at her. And she'd closed the door to my room after going in there. And she said, Melinda, it went right through your door like a knife through butter.
Holy shit.
Literally like a knife through butter, as if your door wasn't there. So she witnessed I was gone during my missing time, and fully conscious saw an alien in the hallway step in her room, stare at her, and then go through my closed door. Now at that point, I had not read anything on this subject. Part of my working with Deborah Troncalli is she was saying, don't read anything, don't color your memories. We'll let your conscious memory and your regression see what comes up. So I wasn't reading anything, but I was familiar with, it's kind of a whole long story there, because someone once tried to give it to me and I refused it because I had a negative reaction to it years ago, but years before this. So this was 89. In 1985, Communion by Whitley Strieber came out. It was 85 or 86. Apparently my roommate, I didn't know this, Gail, owned it and had read it like twice. And she said to me at that point in 89, she goes, are you having experiences like that guy, like that famous author who wrote that book, Whitley something, she said at the time. And I said, I don't know. And she goes, no, I'm telling you, you're having experiences like that guy. And years later, I stayed in touch with Gail, even after we were roommates, kind of on and off over the years. And years later, she ended up telling me she had witnessed even more things happening to me back then. She had a 14-year-old daughter that was living, her and her husband were separated. The 14-year-old back then in 89 was living with the father. She came and lived with us for 3 months. This gets into the MILAB stuff. But years later, Gail told me, she goes, I didn't tell you this back then because you were having a really hard time with your experiences and I thought it would freak you out. But she said, she told me when she found out I was doing the MILAB research, she said to me, she goes, I'm glad that you know that now. And I go, what do you mean, know that now? And she said, well, she goes, back when Angie, her daughter, was living with us for about 3 months, she goes, when Angie moved out, why were you told Angie moved out? I said, well, I was told Angie moved out because she missed her dad and her school friends. And she was going to go back to school and she missed her dad. She says, actually, no, Angie moved out from living with the dad, came to live with us 3 or 4 months because her dad was abusing her. And she said she actually went to live with her aunt. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me that? And she goes, well, Angie moved out of living with us for 3 months because she was witnessing what was happening to me and it was so freaking her out. And she said on more than one night, her and Angie were awoken during the night by military men shouting orders at me and me crying and pleading, no, 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 I don't want to. And
they never said anything to you?
Back then they didn't say anything to me because I was so freaked out by my experiences. They thought it would be too much for me and they were freaked out. Oh. But Angie moved out from living with us because she was so frightened by what she was witnessing happening to me. And I said, so she went back to her dad who was abusing her? And her mom said, no, she went and lived with my sister. She left living with us to go live with my sister. And I said, oh my God. But they'd always told me she went back to, I always, at the time, understood she went back to be with the dad and go back to school. Well, that's just the story they gave me. So, but she said, we were witnessing things happening to you and it so frightened Angie that she moved out.
Oh my gosh. And
yeah.
I hate to be that person, but just a devil's advocate and like,
sure.
She was totally coherent person, very.
Oh yeah. She was 14 and in high school at the time and very bright, was actually starting her own business at the age of 14. And so very, very bright. And her, and came to stay briefly with her mom.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, they didn't want me to know, that she was being abused by her dad. So
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
other part.
yeah.
They weren't telling me at the time, obviously. But this was years later. This was like 4 years later, 4 or 5. Let's say that was early 90, that this was like 95 when her mom is telling me this. And
Once
said,
she found
and
out
she
that
moved
you
out
were,
because
yeah.
she was witnessing it. I mean, she said on more than one occasion, they were woken by what sounded like, because we shared a wall between our bedrooms, and it was an older apartment, so the wall was really thin. And they said, we heard you arguing and crying with what sounded like military guys, like talking to you in military jargon and giving you orders and stuff. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I know, it's way crazy. It's way crazy. I mean, yeah. And I didn't even know back then that was happening.
Yeah.
I
She
actually didn't
waited.
know I was having MILABS till 1993. So it was like 3 years later that I started piecing together that I had an experience in August and an experience in November of 1993. But we'll get to that kind of stuff later. But that was the beginning of my going, and then having like extensive helicopter harassment and stuff. But it turns out I had this happening back in 90 and didn't even know it.
Yeah, that is wild. And I mean, so she waited until you'd actually brought up the fact that you were looking into MILABs and that you were researching this, and so I'm
and like
assuming,
95, 96, whatever that was,
right.
when we were having, is it like 95? We're having that conversation. And she said, are you still having experiences? She had said to me. And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm having some really weird stuff go on. And I'm researching it, and I'm meeting other people. And, so it was kind of the beginning of, I mean, I always say it was 28 years I've been doing the MILAB research. So starting in like 93, and that's when it really kicked off. So in 93, I started doing the MILABS research.
Well, because you cover us,
and it was started with trying to figure out what was going on with me, what was happening with me.
Of course.
So it wasn't like researching other cases at first. It was like, what's going on? Am I alone? Is anyone else having this? Do any of the major abduction researchers have this? And I, quickly learned yes to all of that.
Well, because you cover like a specific, if I'm right, you cover a specific category of MILAB, and maybe in a moment you can kind of explain these different categories, because your focus is on MILAB victims who have had pre-existing extraterrestrial abductions.
Yes, yeah, that's my focus. Yeah.
Right, to then be later subjected to military or private groups. So can you unpack the different definitions or interpretations of MILAB? Maybe explain why you chose to focus on MILAB.
Yeah, there's a lot of incorrect information, and I could point fingers at the sources, easily point fingers.
By all means.
No, I won't. That'd be, but at the sources and people to blame for a lot of misinformation on that, and maybe deliberate disinformation. I wouldn't rule it out. But anyway, so MILABS, the term came about from famous abductee Katarina Wilson, who wrote the book Alien Jigsaw. Katarina Wilson, K. Wilson. K. Wilson realized that her and other people, other abductees, experiencers she was talking to, were having harassment and surveillance and monitoring at the hands of the military, and then also having abductions at the hands of covert humans and military. And so she literally started to say, gosh, it's like we're also being abducted, not just by extraterrestrials, but by the military. And she coined that term. So the history of why we call it MILAB and where that came from was K. Wilson came up with that. And MILAB meant MIL for military and AB for abduction. So she said it's like we're also having experiences with the military.
You know how long ago that was, roughly? What year? Or
early 90s.
Early 90s, right?
Early 90s, yeah. And other experiences were starting to write about their experiences with it, and some researchers were looking into it, most notably Carla Turner, who is both an experiencer and a researcher of it, much like myself. Unfortunately, is no longer with us. and Katerina and a few other people. Well, independently of them, an Austrian researcher by the name of Helmut Lammer, and Helmut and Marion Lammer, his wife, were also looking into it or had come across it, and decided that Helmut, was doing the research, decided he was going to write a book, and literally asked Katerina Wilson if he could use the term for the title of his book. And that's kind of the jump off point in the research community, if you will, called MILABS. And I think the subtitle is, I probably have it right here in my office, Military Mind Control and Alien Abduction. In a moment, I might look for it, right? Because I know I got it in here. Military, and I can hold it up, but Military Mind Control and Alien Abduction is the subtitle, I believe. And so that was written by Helmut. And so that was kind of the kickoff knowledge about it. Although Katerina Wilson wrote about it in Alien Jigsaw. Leah Haley had written about it in her books. Carla Turner, in her 3 books, had written about it. She wrote a book called Taken that gets very much into it. And so this was really the jump off point. But I give Katerina Wilson, she's the one who I give her credit, I guess what I'm trying to say, for being the one who invented the term. And then it's kind of its knowledge in the UFO community really kicking off with Helmut and Marion Lammer writing their book.
So it's no secret to pretty much everyone in the community that the UFO subject in general draws some crazy people into the field.
Yeah.
And I want to know how you, as a researcher of this particular facet, separate fact from fiction. What are the best cases that you feel you could present, that you feel provide good evidence for a MILAB scenario?
Oh yeah, so there's so many. I'm very blessed to have come across some really, really good cases. Some of them are people who are known abductees, well known, and some of them are people who no one knows about yet because I've not written about them. And but I know earlier too, you were asking, and I was making those jokes about, some people that gave this a bad name. But there's some limited views on the subject that unfortunately I don't think are accurate. It's come to mean, now there's a phenomenon called super soldiers, and there's definitely a shadow government. There's definitely, breakaway civilization, shadow government, blah, 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 as well as super soldiers, as well as a secret space program.
Wow, that's a lot of things to pile into one.
Well, all those areas have been linked to this in some accurate ways and some inaccurate ways, okay? Now, there is definitely a group of covert humans involved at many levels in managing what we know is the whole UFO subject in the black world, okay, covert black world. And it involves many countries, many governments. And if you have that concept of maybe shadow government, new world order kind of thing, that there's maybe a group of people, a cabal, if you will, that may be overseeing and managing this. Okay. At some point, those individuals became interested in abductees as another source of information about the extraterrestrials, about their technology, about their motives, about their agenda. And so the abductees were deemed an additional source of information. We have a lot of hands-on experience with the extraterrestrials, with their technology, with their craft, with their procedures. And a lot of abductees like me, but I'm not alone here, have a lot of memory of that various experiences. Some have lesser memory, some have more. And a lot of people have lived with alien abduction throughout their life and have been through a whole gamut of things in their alien experiences. So we became another source of information. Now, in the UFO community, I want to set straight some mis-ideas about the subject, if I may. I will say, and I in the past had a great deal of respect for researcher Stephen Greer. Okay, I still do, in many ways, except for there's some areas he's gotten into that I have less interest in. I'm not alone in the community for saying that. And Dr. Stephen Greer is his own worst enemy in that he has a big ego and he's his own worst enemy in many ways. And many people that have worked with him in the past have quit working with him because he can be difficult that way. Long story short, he can be also opinionated. Okay. He says that he has individuals who have come forward as people, deep level insiders, telling them that they were involved as MILAB perpetrators that feel that, and he says that these people have claimed that they have perpetrated fake alien abductions at the hands of covert humans. Now, I will say this, Dr. Greer, who I have tremendous respect for, does have his own belief system about there are no negative alien experiences. It's all positive. Therefore, if you have a negative one, it's not ETs, it's humans. Okay, that colors his view quite a bit. The subject matter is much more complex than that. You can't say it's all good. You also can't say it's all bad. It's a mix. In my experiences, my ET experiences over all these years, looking back at them, are positive in my life, okay? The MILAB abductions are difficult, but I understand these are people doing a job. Even if I disagree with how they're doing it, I get the motivation. I've had to come to terms with it and understand it because I've lived it, and I've worked with so many people and helped so many people who've had experiences.
Can we talk about
But
motivation, by the way, in a moment? Because I would like to know what you feel their motivation is.
Yeah, but I'll go, yeah, absolutely. But going back to Greer, so now I do know that one such person who talked to him was Richard Doty. Well, Rick Doty is very controversial. For those of you who don't know, he was an AFOSI agent, Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent for many years, and deeply involved, and ended up actually working out at Area 51 for quite a while. He's upfront and talks about that now, and is a controversial guy. I know him. I get along with him. He's nice enough. He's also verified some parts of my own experience. But here's the deal. He told Richard Greer that he knew of people involved in perpetrating fake alien abductions in the MILAB situation. He spoke to me briefly, not about that though, about knowing people who were perpetrators, but that they weren't perpetrating fake ET experiences. They were doing MILABs in the more classic sense that I know of, which is because the person's had real alien abductions that they have an interest. We'll get into that in a minute. But I'm not sure who else Greer may have spoken to. To my knowledge, it's only Richard Doty. If there are others, okay. But I will say this unequivocally, that I have worked with hundreds of people who've had covert human involvement in their experiences. The harassment, surveillance, monitoring, re-abduction, interrogation, follow-up medical procedures, psychic testing, and they've been monitored, watched, befriended by insiders. I mean, I've worked with a lot of people, and you can have experiences at one end. I'll provide this to you so you can show it here, but this chart that shows a line curving up and how this can ramp up and start out in your life with alien abduction and even things before that ramp up to then the various levels of MILAB involvement into actually people being recruited into programs. And you can be anywhere along that curve. I'm about in the middle.
And is that curve based on statistics gathered in terms of correlations of experiences?
My research and the kind of things I'm getting, and I came up with, it can start out here and progress to this and progress to this and progress all the way up into the point of being recruited into special ops programs. But at any point, you can start over again on that or never get that far. So like I said, my own case, I put somewhere in the middle on this ramp, but I do know people at all spectrums of it. I know people who've just had alien abduction and have never had even the harassment surveillance. I know people who've just had alien abduction, but have had monitoring, harassment, surveillance, but have never had a military abduction. And then I know people all the way up who've been fully recruited into special ops, black ops programs, and been recruited all the way. And not only me, but other, you could say Doty is someone who's been recruited, but I don't know that Doty had previous contact. I wouldn't be surprised if he did, you know, but I have met individuals and spoken and interviewed individuals who were started off as alien abductees and then got recruited into special ops programs at all sorts of different
And
levels,
are those
and
kind of
including
people,
MILAB perpetrators.
are those kind of people verifiable in terms of, like, you know, their
Oh yeah.
claims of being
Oh yeah.
recruited? Can we
Yeah.
go into anyone?
In my research, those are all really good questions. In my research, I only work with people that are physical evidence cases. Now, I will listen to other people. I've heard other people's accounts and stories, but the people that I call my cases are people who have physical evidence for at least some aspect, or witnesses, or etc., to their alien abduction and then to their military involvement. And evidence can mean a wide variety of things, but you know, they tend to have multiple types of evidence about their experiences. They're what another researcher calls advanced abductee cases, people who've had a lifetime of alien abduction and have, you know, and etc. And so those are the cases that I work with, and I call my cases when I eventually write. Those are the cases I write about. It'll only be the evidence people, you know. And not even all of them, but it'll be like the people, you know, there's a lot of criterias, and then there'll be statistical data. So maybe in the bigger statistical picture, you know, will be considered more of the cases, okay? These people that I call the perpetrators and stuff are, and the people who've been recruited, the few, you know, handful that I've talked to are very, very credible cases, you know, that I would take to the bank. Their stuff matches up in multiple ways. They have physical evidence, they have witnesses, they have documentation, etc., etc.
Could you talk about any chance of a particular case without obviously giving away the names or anything like that?
Yeah, one guy who contacted me, an alien abductee, had originally contacted me about the fact that he had MILAB experiences and shared some of that with me. And over a couple conversations, opened it up, admitting to me that in contacts to a military abduction event, he started to get used as a perpetrator. In other words, picking up other abductees to interrogate them, do follow-up medical, all the things they may, you know, things that they are interested in. But he became a perpetrator of that, but in an abduction scenario, so somewhat against his will, under drugs, duress, mind control, and started to have extreme guilt about it, has family members that had high-level political connections. I can't give specifics. First off, I don't have his permission. You know, I have to be very vague here on purpose, but high-level political connections that he ended up using those connections to make sure he got out of that program. He doesn't, one of the reasons he doesn't want his name or any details out there, he doesn't want to do anything to flag him as a person of interest that might encourage them to start using him again, or him having MILABS again. So he kind of got himself out of the program by using some high-level connections that he had. And everything about his story, who he is, everything checks out. That's a really good case. Another friend of mine, who I recently did an interview, many people listening to this may have seen, that I just did a radio interview just a number of days ago with Lorian Fenton. Lorian Fenton is a radio show host and podcast host, and is well known as a researcher, investigator, and a conference producer, probably well known by many people for her conference production as well as her radio shows. But she does super soldier research and mind control research. And her and I have cases of individuals that we've both talked to that you would put in that category of super soldier as far as someone recruited into one. Now, for instance, the guy I just talked to never joined the military, yet he found himself used in these ways, even though he personally never joined the military. But he was used in a military capacity, and he was used as someone recruited into that. I have another case that comes to mind right away. I can give a case, a well-known case, Niara Isley, someone who was recruited into some projects, but she actually joined the military. So in her case, this is someone who joined the military, had experiences while in the military, and is a lifelong abductee, and got recruited into things and into participating, but not as a MILAB perpetrator in her case, thank God, but did get recruited into participating in stuff, interacting with ETs. Another gentleman who is a perpetrator is someone who joined the military and lifelong abductee and got recruited into, now in his case, he's someone that speaks about, or did, long story short there, but he did speak for a while, and quite almost romantically about his involvement as a perpetrator. He enjoyed the process. He enjoyed being in on the subject. He enjoyed being in on the truth of knowing about an extraterrestrial presence and interacting with it, and would speak about it almost in sadistic terms, someone who a little bit off enjoying this. Was a credible person though, and his background and things checked out. So I know people and who I know another abductee who went to join the military, was told or asked through her recruitment process into joining the military in a very, normal way. And they wanted her to go a certain direction in it. And she actually stopped the whole recruitment process and pushed away and never joined the military because she was like, how the hell did they know this? And how the hell did, and they were going to fast track her. And she was like, no, no, she didn't want to be a part of it, And so these are just all examples. But that's really advanced, that you're going through a huge process before you're there. Yes, I've had 9 military reabductions. I believe I've had 9. I may have even had more, but 9 that I'm aware of. But I'm, like I said, in this middle, this curve that I have, that I'll provide you. You can put it up.
Well, one of your experiences, which I think you said occurred in the 1990s, involved you and a friend traveling by car in Sedona, Arizona, when your car was stopped by military personnel. You were escorted away and your friend had to remain in the car until you returned. Can we jump into that? Because I want to know what exactly happened here. What do you remember what was said?
Well, that one, that's unfortunately, sorry, Jay, but it's not a good example, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't remember that one. I'll tell you what I know. A friend of mine and I were in Sedona late one afternoon. We're driving around, and it was back in the mid or early 90s. And anyway, so what I remember from that is we were driving, and suddenly it got dark, and we made our way back to town or whatever. We were out by the infamous Bradshaw Ranch area, as a matter of fact, which is very infamous for a lot of stuff. I can talk more about that in a minute, but that's like a whole separate lecture. But anyway, so, and our car was stopped. And now I don't have recall of this. I just know it seemed, back then I wasn't so aware of like missing time like I would be now. But retrospectively, and her and I talked about it over the years. Unfortunately, this same friend has now passed away a bunch of years ago. But for years, we would talk about this, and especially when I started to really do this research. And she's like, because maybe it was even early 90s that we had this experience. I'd have to think back as to when, but I think early 90s. She says, so what I remember is it just got dark. We got back late, had missing time. So I don't remember that event, and I have not had regressive hypnosis over it. What she says happened is the car we were out driving, and all of a sudden guys in it, like a Jeep, pull up, a military vehicle. They get out, they have guns. They ask for me to come with them. They asked for her to remain in the car. She was driving. They take me from the car at gunpoint and walk me away. She says, I'm gone for about an hour, maybe just over an hour. They bring me back. She has no idea where they took me. They bring me back. They put me in the car, and that's that. And no, I don't know if they did something. I think they did at the time to her that she didn't instantly recall it, because she wasn't immediately like, oh my God, who are they? They took you. So over years, she remembered it too as, wow, it got dark all of a sudden. Now she claims they didn't take her, that she remained in the car while they took me away. But obviously they drugged her too, or did something, hypnosis. I always say these guys have mind control down to a science. They use drugs, hypnosis, fear, intimidation, and pain inducement, and they can repress memory. Any combination of those things, and they've got it down to a real science. It's not perfect, and the brain has an incredible ability to retain experiences and memory. And when you can get past the trauma, because I think a lot of our repression as both abductees and MILABs is a natural process of the brain to repress trauma. Anyone, you have a traumatic experience in your life, and if it's traumatic enough, you'll block it off in order to go on living life. I think it's a natural reaction to trauma. And so I think in these experiences we do, combine with either the ETs doing things, and there's things that they do to repress memory. They do what's called mind stare in your eyes and wipe your forehead, and different things that are well known in abduction research to be something that at that point they shut you off, and or repress the memory. And then also with the military, like I said, the fear, drugs, hypnosis, intimidation, and also pain inducement stuff. So they can do that. So in that case, they may have done something when they brought me back to the car. They probably did something to both of us at that moment that we just knew we had this missing time. But my friend said it started to surface in conscious memory for her and in dreams. And for a long time, she didn't say anything because she kept hoping I would remember. And it's when I started, just a few years later, starting to share with her about my MILAB experiences. And she goes, well, we had something together. And I was like, what? What do you mean we had something together? And she tells that account. So I have many experiences I remember in great detail. Unfortunately, that's not one of them.
Is that a different friend to the one before that you were living with?
Mm-hmm.
God, I hope my friends would tell
and...
me if something was happening, because
Yeah.
You seem to have a trend of people waiting until years later to tell you something absolutely
Well, I have lots of witnesses.
Happened.
There's a recent interview I did for a gentleman by the name of Yannick with a Facebook page that's out there that I think you saw this, of myself.
Yeah.
And Misha Johnston, who I've had stuff happen with, Lorian Fenton, who I've had stuff happen with, and Jocelyn Buckner, who I've had stuff with. And the four of us were on a panel together talking about our shared MILAB experiences. And Yannick just kind of wound us up and let us go. We took over, poor guy. But because you think I do that, put me together with them. It's like, forget about it, But we did. And anyway, so I recommend, we'll put a link to that below this, besides some footage from my sightings tours. But that, I recommend people see that, because we go into detail about experiences we shared together and the evidence for those experiences. And but those, so luckily I have witnesses and experiences that we did talk about it right away. Myself and two male friends, Steve and Mike, those are their real names, had an experience together in 1990. That turned out, we knew for sure was alien abduction right away. It turns out it was also a little bit of military involvement in that too. So it was aliens, and we can get into that too, aliens and military working together. But I want to go back on something we were touching on and I never finished on, which is Greer's, this kind of assumption by Stephen Greer that therefore any scary abductions are all human is, first off, that doesn't make sense. Okay. And there's so much contrary evidence. So I could go on, but I don't want to take up the time on that. And then that therefore any negative quote alien abductions are really the military because he's had these few people tell him. Well, I can say unequivocally in my research, and I had recently in this in-depth interview that I did with Lorianne Fenton for her radio show, and we addressed this, and I think us women addressed it too in that panel. None of us in our research or experiences, I've worked with hundreds of abductees with these experiences, I have never come across a single case where the military was trying to perpetrate a fake alien abduction. The perpetrators that Lorianne and I have both, that I've worked with, and the one she's worked with, and the few that we both know together, but she's talked a lot more and I've talked to more, none of them have ever said they tried to perpetrate a fake alien abduction, ever. So if that has happened at all, it is extremely rare. I don't know what I don't know. So could it have happened and I don't know about it? Yeah. But I've never had any of my hundreds of cases come up and try to tell me at all or bring up in any form that the military were ever trying to pass themselves off, or covert human operations were never trying to pass themselves off as an alien abduction. So if someone contacts me and says, Melinda, that happened to me, I want to know the details, I'm going to ask you tough questions. But I've never come across it. Neither have any of those other women that, and major abduction researchers I work with. I've asked all them, none of them have come across it.
So does that make, because this is not something that I've really looked extensively into, so I'm assuming this would probably be something you might be able to answer. Would that make Richard Doty's claims about false
well, I got to talk to him about it.
Well, yeah, would that make him the only person that's actually spoken about it so far as well?
He'll probably see this. He'll probably see this, and I'll say, Rick, contact me. Let's have a couple conversations about this.
But is he the only one that you've heard spoke about it?
I don't know. Well, there's a part of the disclosure videos that Greer has is Dr. Greer interviewing Rick Doty, and
I've listened to that.
Okay, so therefore I guess he said it there. Now I don't know how that was edited or whatever. So until I talk to Rick directly, and then Greer says he's talked to others. But I'm saying if it's happened, it's very rare. Oh, another thing that came up recently, I know that James Ian Doley had a piece up about this. And that piece was about a very old case study where Jacques Vallée, famous UFO researcher Jacques Vallée, was talking about I think it was the 60s or early 70s, a CIA operation in, I think, Peru or Bolivia, I'm not sure.
Oh, to make Jesus Christ appear.
Yeah, well, and also something where they said they made them think it was ETs, like an ET abduction situation or ETs present, and it was a CIA operation. So am I saying that Vallée is lying about that? No, there's probably documentation, and that probably happened. So, but again, in my research, you guys, I've never come across anyone saying that the covert humans involved were trying to perpetrate a fake alien experience. If this happened to a bunch, I would have gotten it in hundreds of cases. I've never gotten it. Did it happen in a CIA study in the late 60s, early 70s that Vallée is talking about? Well, maybe, and did Doty know of someone involved in something? Maybe, but does that mean it's happening all the time? Why wouldn't I be coming across this? And me and other abduction researchers, all the other alien abduction researchers, I'm not hearing a single thing from any of them, and I've asked them that anyone has come across covert humans trying to perpetrate a fake alien experience. You guys, the MILABs are not perpetrating a fake alien experience. Okay, if it exists, it's extremely rare, and I've never come across it. I'm not saying it may not exist in those two circumstances. Maybe it does, but certainly Greer's take that therefore any negative alien experience is really just the military is negating a whole bunch of evidence saying otherwise.
Have you come to any conclusions, or at
I get
least
fired up, sorry, but
no,
I'm
don't.
emotional about this.
No, that's absolutely fine.
It's very deep. Not only is it my own personal experience, but I've helped a lot of people. And when I say help, I'm not a therapist. I'm just a researcher and investigator. But you end up by default being a therapist when people share their experiences with you, because you're being someone they can talk to, who's accepting and open to hearing it, and wants to see your evidence. And so, but I admit I don't have a clinical background in therapy, and I am not a hypnotherapist. A lot of people have encouraged me to do that, but thank God I work with a number of great hypnotherapists that have helped me, that I also send other people to. But I choose to remain both an experiencer, someone who's gone public about their own experiences, as well as a researcher, investigator of alien abduction and military covert human involvement.
Have you come to any conclusions, or like at the very least some strong suspicions as to what entity or entities are responsible for MILAB operations? And by that, I kind of mean specific agencies or contractors that you've red flagged or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah, it's very layered. First off, in the research and people's experiences, I've always asked, I have a set number of questions, if I'm doing a formal interview on it, if I'm investigating this person to be one of what I call my cases, and when I say cases, just means researched, investigated, interviewed cases, is what were they wearing? Okay. And certain things come up consistently that the individuals are wearing in these reabduction events. First, too, I want to give some clarity before we go there. I'll answer that. Is defining the what is a MILAB, because a lot of it starts with low grade harassment and surveillance stuff, which is phone monitoring, phone interruption, computer monitoring, computers being messed with, email being messed with, social media being messed with, whatever. And cell phone, and etc. And then being watched, being followed, having your car followed, having your home under surveillance, having people around photographing your home, or a big black van parked outside for days at a time, or this kind of thing. This is common in these experiences. Having what's called the black helicopter harassment, unmarked helicopters hovering over where you live, following you while you're driving, etc., etc. Back when I was getting my first regressions by Deborah Troncalli, we had black helicopters come. She was in a second-story office, and at one time like a third-story office. And these black helicopters would come. We were in Newport Beach, California, and hover right outside the window while I had a session with her. And she actually photographed some of it.
So do you have any suspicions as to who's behind that?
Okay, well, going back to answering your question. So I just defining that this harassment, surveillance, and then you could be befriended by insiders. So that'll get into part of your answer. I'll get more into that in a minute, but befriended by insiders, having people with deep level involvement in military intelligence, aerospace companies, all sorts of different covert black world positions in the military and government, who may be befriending you, and as well as the monitoring, surveillance. Then you could have threatening phone calls, threatening emails, and then it can ramp up where you're watched and followed more often, more and more black helicopter harassment, and then you can have the reabduction where you are picked up by covert humans, usually military, because military uniforms and attire are seen, and have an abduction at the hand of humans. You might have an alien abduction where you see humans involved that appear to be there in the context of an alien abduction in some official capacity, for instance, wearing military uniforms. Now, I don't mean just another abductee, because there are mass abductions where maybe you see another abductee that happened to be someone looking like military, but I'm talking people who seem to be there monitoring the procedures or directly involved with the
Well, I think
ETs.
Betty and Barney Hill's a famous case of that, right? Because there was
Yes,
supposed to be
yes,
someone in military uniform in the saucer.
yes, yes. Well, they had more than the one
Right.
abduction. That's the most famous one, as they were going into Canada and stopped that one, but they've had others besides that, and continuing military stuff. Kathleen Marden has become the head of abduction research for MUFON now. There were different people in that position over the years, but Kathleen's had it for a number of years now. And she, of course, did many books with the late Stanton Friedman and has continued to do books on her own. And she has written about this and researches it. And heading up the MUFON abduction research, they had extensive questionnaires they put out where they put questions involving MILAB stuff and came up with statistical numbers there. The organization FREE, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, they've had extensive questionnaires for abductees and have had over 2,000, probably close to 3,000 people, I think, now respond to that. And they've gotten statistical information on MILAB related questions. But going back to the reason about Kathleen is she is the niece of the Hills. And of course, her and Stanton Friedman wrote about the Hill case extensively. And she's written about being their niece and knowing firsthand as a member of the family and everything that happened. But I've talked to her about this, and they had MILAB stuff happen, not only right after the initial case, but since, or, until they both passed. Barney passed first many years ago, and then eventually Betty. But she said they had additional alien experiences after their first one and additional military experiences. And so she was very upfront with me about that. And that's something, when I eventually do write about this, I'll include something about that. I'm sure I'll talk to her more at length about it, as well as MUFON's findings, and they're working with individuals on the responses to the questions. Going back to what was your prime question? Because I admit I got a little off.
My prime question
track.
was, what are your conclusions or suspicions about the particular specific entities, contractors, agencies, groups?
So going back to asking people what they've seen in the actual military abductions, is a lot of the uniforms that they see. Now, a lot of time abductees aren't aware of various military uniforms. And early on, with my own experience and then starting to interview other people and get the descriptions, I started to look up uniforms. And someone I knew who was in military reserves at the time provided me a bunch of uniform catalogs that were extremely helpful. And so it turned out that a high percentage of the uniform seen end up being Navy uniforms, different factions of the Navy. Because they're Navy land personnel, and there's short sleeve tan shirts and pants seen quite a few times as guards, particularly if someone is taking to a underground military base. So there were a few Air Force related things, a few Army related, Army Marines, sure. But such a high percentage of uniforms that when I did the investigation and things that match the description end up being this huge variety of naval uniforms. So now, if you go back to the Lazar case, Bob Lazar said he was paid by the Navy, okay, working out at S4. So you go, well, that's an underground base. S4 is part of Area 51. And if he was paid and that was managed by the Navy, and naval uniforms and stuff were seen there, other individuals who've come out and worked in that capacity have said the same thing. For instance, Bill Uhouse has said the same thing. It was run by the Navy, etc. So you go into, so there's these various accounts of insiders from Area 51 whose stories kind of somewhat match each other, and they say that. So I think some of this underground base management, based upon what people in MILABS are seeing, based upon whistleblowers and insiders, are run by the Navy, naval operations, naval intelligence, naval operations. Now, of course, this isn't your surface level government, obviously. This is at the point that this subject is being managed. And so we're talking very deep covert operations. But, you know, going back to Doty for a second, he talks about Area 51, and he mentioned to me at a recent conference that his time working there, he knew people on these MILAB squads that he had talked to. Now, he didn't say at the time that they were doing anything to perpetrate a fake alien experience. He had seen my presentation, and he said, everything you said in your presentation, the kinds of experiences you had are what these guys did. Now, again, he's a very controversial character. So, you know, what do I make with what he says? It becomes interesting. But going back to what you were just saying, so I think that there's a huge amount of naval involvement. Like I said, there's been some Army, Marine, you know, Air Force stuff seen a little bit. It's just the majority of the uniform seen. A lot of times the abductee can just say the guy was in camouflage, you know. I've become very familiar with the different types of camouflage, and I listen to their description of it to say, is it green camos, or is it desert tans? You know, is it modern, which looks like little squares and geometric designs, or is it rounded, which would mean older, you know? And current cases are describing current uniforms, that it has that pixelated look of the current uniforms, and then there's also a type of gray camo. So there's a gray, there's a kind of blues, there's tans, and then there's camos that are greens, you know, green and black kind of. And so I really listen for that if they're sharing that. And yeah, you know, it's hard to pinpoint exactly. So you're left with, if the abductees recall those kind of details, that's where you're able to kind of piece things together.
Right.
Now, covert guys involved come from all different levels and areas. As far as people being befriended, they're often, like I said, intelligence guys, intelligence community, CIA, NSA, you know, DOD, military intelligence, and as well as high-ranking Navy officials, you know, military officials, and aerospace backgrounds, that kind of thing, technology development, people like that someone could be befriended by some insider that provides them information confirming part of their experience or asking them further. I've had a lot of that over the years. Truth is, I now know I had that involvement prior to my realizing I was an abductee in '89. I had already been befriended by insiders prior to that. Before I even had an interest really in the UFO subject, these guys showed an interest in me.
How did they turn up in your lives?
Long, complicated stories, but I can put my hand on developing a friendship with one of the members of what I now know as the working group, and they're behind the whole current disclosure stuff going on, and an early member of that group that I developed a friendship with because I had an interest in paranormal things. I became interested in psychokinesis, manipulating matter with the mind, and doing what's called spoon bending, and took classes in that from one of these individuals. Now, you could say that's not related, but I mean, it ended up being related, and he ended up sharing some stuff with me later, confirming part of my stuff that told me he knew this was happening to me before I knew it was happening.
That's interesting. I don't,
Yeah.
you don't suppose you're able to like say what was shared with you in any way?
Well, as I started to look into the MILAB stuff, I give another presentation. Again, we'll add the link below to the 40-year history of the working group, where I do go a little bit more into I don't want to take a bunch of time, but someone in the group that I'd met at a lecture in LA had told me about the group when he found out I knew this gentleman. This gentleman, I don't mind saying his name, is the late Jack Houck. But he said, you know, Jack? Oh, yeah. And so he told me some stuff, which started me on a huge investigative journey, a 28-year journey into the 40-year history of this group. And I ended up approaching some of the individuals involved. The first one I approached to talk about, because he said, oh, you know Jack, and he told me a bunch of stuff. And he told me about Jack's background in the UFO subject, kind of, and I was like, you know, and so I was going to go. He didn't know when he told me this that same week I had another class. I was taking a ongoing remote viewing class at the time from Jack Houck, and I had a class, another class that week on remote viewing with Jack Houck, and I took that class and I waited till afterwards. And I said what this person said to me, to Jack, and he went ballistic. In fact, I thought the guy who told me this was going to die. Not just from the group, like he told me something highly classified, and Jack went highly ballistic, and ended up confirming a bunch of things to me. Eventually we go out, we're standing by the car because I was helping him put away his boxes of documents and materials and handouts and whatnot that he would do for this remote viewing class I was taking. And he was putting this stuff in the car, and so I kind of stayed. That was kind of the pretense to stay, was to help him. And I had known him for years, and he turned to me and he said, first off, he'd already said back in the classroom, he'd already said to me, that subject that you and my friend Steve have so much interested in, he said, I know all about it. I've known all about it all along. I've been deeply involved for years. And by the way, he went on and say he knew all about my experiences. But then we went out to the car, and he said, and there was a specific comment about the MILAB experiences. He said, that stuff that's happening to you? I said, yeah. He goes, he pointed at himself and he goes, I was never a part of it. But he knew that, in other words, he knew that others were. By him saying specifically, I was never a part of any of that.
Right.
But I'm like, but you knew that happened to me prior to this conversation, you know, which was this conversation we're having was in, I think, 95 or 96. I'd have to look at some records on that. I think I say it in the other presentation, but, and he said, you know, I said, in other words, you've known that. And he just kind of looked at me and nodded. And I said, you know, and the implications were he knew that others were involved, even if he wasn't, because he said, he literally went, I was never a part of that. And I'm like, so who was, you know? And that told me that he knew. And he said, I've been deeply involved for years, and he basically said, as long as you've known me and longer. Well, now I know it goes back at least 40 years. So that clued me in that, wow, this precedes my knowledge of it, you know. And anyways, that I tried to be concise there. It's complicated, but all of this is very complicated. It's very hard to be concise and relate it to people in a way that will make sense and is logical, because multiple conversations can come up and references to previous conversations and whatnot. But these are all things that happen to people with these experiences. And you know, and some people just have low-grade harassment surveillance, the phone monitoring, the computer monitoring, being watched or followed, and don't have more. It seems like you become a person of interest, and there's more and more interest. And like I said, then I've worked with these people. I'm in the middle of that curve. I've worked with these people that have had so much more happen than even me, you know.
I want to ask if there's,
okay.
So these people who are being harassed, followed, phone calls, emails, is there proof of that? Is there anyone that's got some, like, you know, like his email upon email? I don't know who these are coming from, his phone calls, you know.
Sure, threatening emails, copies of them, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Some people, you know, it's like having UFO sightings. People are really bad about getting their own evidence. You know, I even think on my tour, people are like, why don't you film it all the time? Well, I don't have the equipment. I'm caught up with my clients. I'm instructing them. We're caught up in the moment. It'd be a real hassle to set all that up every time. I am talking to Bob McGuire, you know, about having that stuff out, and you know, we'll see. We'll see
Yeah,
going
I
forward.
want one hooked up in my house.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm talking about Skyhub for those that don't know. And
I'll be
we
having
can
him
put a
on
link,
soon to
we
talk
can put
about
another
that.
link to that, you know.
Yeah.
But so maybe in the future, but right now I'm up to, you know, okay, if people bring up cameras or video cameras, a few people have. I have a few people that have caught some interesting stuff while with me, thank God. So that's why. And that one gentleman got an amazing still photo on one of my tours of a big V-shaped craft. This thing was huge. I mean, at arm's length, it was lit up all amber and it was about 2 inches long at arm's length. But he had a big fancy telephoto camera, you know, telephoto lens, and had his camera on a tripod. And he got pictures of it. Well, you know, I didn't. I've taken out a lot of clients. I can kind of look back to when I think he went out. I lost contact with the guy. He promised me he'd send me the pictures. He showed us to him. He brought it up on the camera, and he had a little, you know, view screen to the side, and he brought it up on there and showed us. And it was this big, giant V-shaped thing. I mean, this thing had to have been like aircraft carrier size. It was, you know, quite large. And unfortunately, I never got a picture of it. So here's someone on my tour who got an amazing picture, showed us all the pictures that he took, but I never got a copy from him. So, you know, and I think back and I go, I should have gotten his name and phone number. You know, if I remembered his name, it's in the database for my tours. I just don't remember his name. But I've even gone back in my old organizers trying to figure out, okay, when did he go? Who was it? And I may do that again because I really want to get that picture. But often those people with sightings are the worst, my point being, saving their own evidence, you know, and getting their own evidence. Well, same with abductees. The reason I brought that up is abductees are notorious. Maybe it's part of the wanting to like deny it and shut it off, that you don't collect your evidence, you destroy your evidence. You know how many abductees said, I had this thing come out of my ear, come out of my eye, blew it out my nose, it was metal. And I go, where is it now? And they go, I flushed it, I crushed it, I had it for a month, but then I put it in the trash. You know, there's something about the experience that I think the inability to cope or come to terms with it possibly, or maybe you were given a command to destroy the evidence. And unfortunately that happens. Now, having had said that, I have so many cases with really good evidence and evidence for their alien abduction. I've tried to save my evidence. There have been times when I've been bad at it, but going on with that, yes, I have people with evidence. For instance, thank God I have a witness in Misha, the time we were taken together. We had tremendous evidence of the break into her apartment. They broke in the front door. They damaged the door handle, the door bolt lock. They damaged the door frame, the weather stripping. It had all just been redone a week before our event, with new weather stripping, new door locks, all this stuff by our landlord. Thank God it had been recent, and so we knew it was all very fresh, freshly painted. So we took lots of photos of the damage to that. It was very obvious. In that experience, I turned and tripped over a glass top coffee table that she had, and it broke it, and it had these metal legs. It bent the metal legs when I turned and almost fell on it and then fell back. We have her landlord at the time saying that all the lights along a fence and along the wall in the end of the building where her apartment was, that all the bulbs had been loosened in the light structures along the fence where these bulbs in it like a big glass ball, and then next to each door on the end of the building. So there were at least 3 along the fence, maybe 4, and at least 4 along the end of the building. Although someone had gone through and unscrewed all the bulbs, like they were still in there, they were just unscrewed. And her landlord was going around asking everyone who lived there who unscrewed the light bulbs, you know, because she had someone come in, a technician to come in and fix the lighting that had gone out, and he was the one that found your lights work fine. Someone had just unscrewed all the bulbs. Well, that happened the night of our experience, that they had gone through and unscrewed all the bulbs to shut the light off on that end of the building. And I mean, wow, you know, and the damage to the door, and I pictures, I'll give these of the damage to the door and the bruises that I had received that night on my body. I have other experiences where I have bruises. You know, that you're not always handled real well, and I tend to fight back, and you know, you doing this with somebody, and you know, you end up with bruises, or a guy walking you down a hallway with a death grip on your arm that wants you to follow along with him. You end up with the fingerprint bruises, and ouch, myself doing that. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, I have that, and so do my cases. And so that's the kind of evidence. I'm sorry, I got distracted again. Did I answer your question?
I honestly can't remember, Melinda. Don't worry.
It's not bad. I get distracted. Sorry, guys. Like I said,
it's
this
a good
is complex.
technique.
I get so off on tangents because it's such a complex subject.
Why do you think they're doing it? I think that's a good one to start to jump into. Why do you personally think all of this is going on? Because it's bloody crazy if it's going on.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of evidence, the amount of experiences and people, you know, it's just so much. I mean, I have so many pieces of videotape that people have taken of black helicopters over their house, you know, circling, you know. I had neighbors of mine who, quoting my neighbors, not where I live now, but when I lived in Corona del Mar, California, I had someone in the house right in front of me, and I'm going to quote them. They said, it's like we have military helicopters trying to land on our roof. Why are the helicopters always trying to land on our roof? You know, I'm quoting my neighbor, you know, and when your neighbor says it's like the military are constantly trying to land on our roofs, you know, it's like we're in the middle of a residential area where there's, you know, 20 houses in a row, you know, but I'm the one with them hovering right over us, you know, and so I have neighbors that have witnessed that. And like I said, I've had people provide video footage, still footage of their helicopter harassment, of the marks on their body, of damage to their environment, damage to their car, damage to their home, documents they've received, you know, tampered emails, or, you know, threatening things, and, you know, so much. A great piece of evidence that I have is a case of mine. It's crazy. One experience that I had, a roommate and I had witnessed this electronic device, which we think was an EMP device that ended up causing her to go to sleep. But the military guys sat me up in bed and were shaking me really hard to like override this thing that caused, we were in a hotel room. It was a friend I was traveling with, and we were in a hotel room, and it caused her to remain asleep. And they had to shake me really hard, I think, to override this thing. But I remember the sound of the device. I had a male case, a guy I work with, great evidence, great experience, great memory, come forward and say once he had a voice activated tape recorder in his environment, and he taped one of his MILAB events when they came in. And you hear these guys coming in the front door. You hear this on the tape. These guys come in the front door. There's two guys apparently talking to each other. They sound a lot like military. They're going through his stuff. They knew he had a recorder. They're looking for it, not finding it. He was asleep on a couch. They move him around, but all the time, and they're moving him, and you can hear him go, you know, he's like mumble stuff to them. But you think, why would a guy being handled by two guys and who are talking to each other, how would he stay asleep? And they're moving him around. Well, what you hear in the background is this device. And this guy told me, I think that's some kind of, you know, electromagnetic pulse device, that sound, and it's keeping me asleep, that even though they're moving me around, they're kind of waking him up, but yet he's fallen right back asleep. He says, I think it's that device. And when he played that for me and my friend Scotty, who went on this trip with me, her and I, Scotty's a woman, but her and I listened to this thing and go, oh my God, that is exactly what we heard in the hotel room. And so we know he recorded the same thing in his environment, besides recording. So here's a recording at the beginning of his MILAB. Now, I've shared this with a lot of people and their jaws drop. I did share it once in a lecture for a MUFON group that they had a hard time deciphering exactly what was going on because there's so much layered noise. The guy's in a sleeping bag on the couch. They're moving around. You hear the sound of the sleeping bag. They unzip the zipper. You hear that. You hear these two guys talking. They said, well, yes, it's two guys talking. It's muffling. It's moving around. There's this clicking device in the background.
Is there still access to the audio? Because we could play it.
Yeah, but they're like, how do you prove that that's a MILAB?
Yeah.
But the guy's story and stuff, I mean, that,
but he could have created the whole thing. I mean, his story, he might have come in with
evidence is not proof, and that even goes back to sightings. You have a photo of a good sighting, you have a video of a good sighting. It's not proof that that was an extraterrestrial craft. It's not even proof of something there. So unfortunately, as good of a piece of evidence as that is, evidence is evidence, it's not proof. But in a court of law, it's a preponderance of the evidence, right? So it's how much extensive evidence that would allow a jury. Well, I can say I've got more than enough evidence that a good jury examining all of it would go, oh my God, that's obviously happened.
In that case, that kind of leads on to something I wanted to ask you, which is, have you ever come across any sort of official documentation that hints towards the existence of MILAB operations or anything that's similar at all?
I'll say this, nothing's coming to mind right away about anything that does that. Now, and we can get into it if you want, but I know Jim Semivan, who is a member of To the Stars. And he has told me he has some form of evidence to show me, to prove to me that this, my involvement in this program. I don't know what that is. I hope it's more than just somebody telling him. It may be, but I had the feeling that he said, it has to be when we're together in person, but when we're together in person, I was under the distinct impression, based upon that conversation, that when we're together again in person, he has something he will show me. So I'm hoping if it's something that's a document or something, that I'm allowed to have a copy of it. He may not be able to leave me a copy. It may just be something showing me, but he asked around through his connections. He's retired now, was very, very high level CIA. And he said, I asked around, I was provided something that will prove to you your involvement. And so he claimed, but I don't have it. And so answer to your question, I can't think that I have anything mentioning MILAB specifically or those activities. No.
I want to talk to you about your relationship with Jim Semivan, because for those that are unaware, Jim Semivan spent 25 years in the CIA's Directorate of Operations and is the current VP of Operations for To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. Can you jump in at all about how this all started off? How did you actually become contact with Jim Semivan? Because I thought it had something to do with you bumping into his wife on a UFO tour or something.
No, not his wife, but a friend of his. Yeah.
Friend of his. Oh, okay,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, I'll try to give it. There's, like all these things, there's a short version and a very long version.
There's never a short version with you, Melinda.
Believe it or not, I'm giving you the short version. So this is really tough. Okay. A woman came on my UFO sighting tour, and you guys, I've had so many people ask to talk to me later, and I always say quick side thing, and then I get sidetracked. But don't let me forget to come back to this, okay? As a quick example, one guy who came, I have people come all the time who share their own personal previous abductions. I have over 300 pilots sharing all their sightings. I mean, tons of stuff. Military guys sharing their stuff just constantly. One particular guy came on my tour, said, I used to live here in Sedona. I moved away 2 years ago. But prior to that, I lived here for like 12 years. Okay. And he said, I had a bunch of alien stuff, and he was there with his mom. He's a guy in his roughly 40, had his mom with him. And he said, she used to live here too. We came not only to Sedona, but to both of us to visit our friends, that still live here. They asked to see me privately the next day. They go into abduction stuff. abductions run in family, alien abductions, that's well understood in the abduction research arena, and MILABS run in families too, so that's well established. But okay, so they're sharing alien abduction stuff. His mom leaves in the conversation to go use the restroom. We met here in my office at the Center for New Age. She goes to use the restroom. While she's in the restroom, he says, "Can I meet with you tomorrow? I'll take you to lunch tomorrow." I said, "Okay, privately." "Sure." He says, "I'll tell my mom I'm going to meet with you privately." But they're both sharing alien abduction stuff that happened to them throughout their lives, you know, and as a mother and son, and separately, and here in Sedona. Okay, the next day he takes me to lunch, and he proceeds to share 3 MILAB events with me. Now, I had a mass MILAB event here in Sedona involving my friend Jocelyn and her family, and we knew that there were like 100 people in this experience. We were in this underground base, like 100 other abductees, so it was a mass MILAB event. I have many cases that have had mass MILAB events, mass alien abduction events, mass MILAB events, both. Okay. And so I always thought, gee, it'd be interesting if I ever met someone who was one of these other people in this event. This guy shares 3 MILAB events with me. One of them, he goes into great detail I'd never ever shared. Jocelyn and I had never talked about. He goes into great detail about the MILAB event, and he remembers the date. He's in the same event we're in. He's one of the other 100 people in this hallway going through the same stuff we went. And he describes everything exactly as we remember.
Wow. And
he said, "Have you ever heard or met anyone who thought they were part of that living here in Sedona?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Really? What'd they say?" And he goes, Who? And I said, "Me." And he goes, No. He goes, "What do you mean you?" He said, "Yeah, you interviewed them." I said, "No, I was there." He goes, "What do you mean you were there? You should have seen this." It was like, what? And he's like, I said, "Yeah, me and my friends." He goes, "What?" I said, "Myself and 4 friends were 5 other people in that hallway with you." And yet he recalled in detail things that we'd already recalled. And my meeting him was like 4 or 5 years after the experience happened. Him coming on my UFO tour and sharing with me 2 days later in private this experience that he was part of. And he had not had any regression. It was all conscious memory. It wasn't bits and pieces, but all the bits and pieces he remembered matched our thing. And I waited till he was done before I shared anything about what we remembered, because I wanted him to give everything he remembered before I shared anything. And even then I didn't share a lot. I just confirmed that everything that he said matched ours, and that he should get regression about the rest. So I didn't give other details other than to confirm the parts he already said. But all the parts he said match verbatim what we already recall. Anyway, so going back to what you were asking.
Jim Semivan origins.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Which I can get away from many times, so because I hate talking about it. Okay. I had this lady come on my tour. She owned a museum on the East Coast. She told me that her museum had artwork in it by Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann, famous remote viewer, and one of the people who started up the remote viewing project at SRI and all that. He's part of that whole story, for those that know that. And he may be the one person that would be most credited for the original remote viewing protocols that became what was known at the time as coordinate remote viewing. And because of, they kind of reverse engineered his own way of doing it. And so he was also a famous artist with artwork in New York and galleries and whatnot. And she had connections going back to him and to those individuals. And of course, as soon as she's sharing all this, you know, her friendship with the late Ingo Swann and other people involved, my antennas are like, ding, ding, ding. What? You know, I'm like, what? Okay. And she shared all this. And then she opens up and says, "Do you know who Jim Semivan is?" I went, yeah. I mean, like To the Stars, to the Stars Academy? And she goes, yeah. And she goes, oh, good, you do. And I go, yeah. And I said I had met Ingo once, and I trained remote viewer, and I used to go to their IRVA, International Remote Viewing Association conferences and stuff. So, this all came up. I knew Hal, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Russell, Targ, etc. Okay. So I was like, yeah, and she goes, well, I've become pretty good friends with him because him and some other friends of his are going to come tour my art gallery. They want to see the artwork I have by Ingo and everything else. And then she said, I happen to live near him. And she said, a while back, well, actually not right then, but maybe a while back, at some point they lived near each other. So she said, we knew each other as neighbors, and now he wants to come to the art gallery and bring some of these other people, possibly some of the other people involved, with him. I'm like, wow. And she said, I want to tell him all about this tour, because this was like at the end of the tour. And then I think she actually met with me even the next day, but she goes, I want to tell him about the tour and having sightings, because we had remarkable sightings that night. And she said, I want to tell him all about this. May I? I'm like, please. And she said, he may want to talk to you. If he wants to talk to you, open to that? I said, please. She said, so I can give me your number? Yes. Okay. And she gave me brochures and stuff. She had all about her art gallery. And so like 2 days go by after talking to her and everything, and I get this phone call, and it's Jim Semivan. And he says, my friend went on your tour, told me all about it. And I said, well, that was fast. He said, yeah, she called me the next day, And so it's literally like 48 hours after I'm talking to her, he's on the phone with me. And I'm like, wow. And so we struck up this whole conversation, and that's how it started. And now then he came out here. I want to say about a year, I think was like a year after that, because he even brought it up at that time, so it wasn't that long. It was a number of months after that, because he said, he goes, I'm coming out there with my wife. We're going to Scottsdale. We have friends in Scottsdale we're going to go see. And he said, we'll come up to Sedona. I'd love to meet you. I think we had already had like 2 conversations on the phone at that point. And he said, I'd like to meet you. And I remember it was, I'd have to think of the years, a number of years ago, but it was, he met with me on Super Bowl Sunday. I said, you're missing the Super Bowl. He goes, that's okay. And he took me out, him and his wife took me out to lunch, and we had a wonderful lunch. But then in context to our lunch conversation, not only did he ask about my tours, he ended up asking me about my alien abductions. Let's just say as soon as I met him and he called me, I did some research about him and his background. I know someone else with a career with the CIA, and I asked them, and they asked around and found some things out, as well as some other highly placed individuals. And let's just say he did his homework on moi. So by the time we got together, it was obvious in our discussion we knew a lot about each other. Because I wanted to know, who is this guy, who am I dealing with? And he wanted to know the same, or maybe he already knew it about me. So, but I don't mind saying this here. This is known, and Tom DeLonge wrote about it in the foreword of one of his books, I believe, or the intro, and then I guess Semivan, I think, wrote a foreword. But it's well known that Jim Semivan is an alien abductee, and him and his wife had a very dramatic experience together. I have been asked not to give any details, but I will say this much, because that's all known and out there already. I'll say it's a very typical experience. Yes, it was very dramatic, even traumatic for them, but it's, as far as can you hear me okay? It's
Yep,
saying
yep.
bad internet connection. Can you hear
I
me?
can hear you. You're fine.
Okay, didn't break up. Okay, I just want to make sure it's not breaking up. Okay, so he ended up sharing that alien abduction with me in detail. Again, I'm not at liberty to discuss it, and it's typical. It's not even necessary. It's very typical alien abduction in every way. And he asked me about my alien abductions. Well, then he'd obviously seen a bunch of videos and stuff on me because he knew about the MILAB stuff, and he asked me about that. So then we talked about that, and that was a little surprising, but it was so obvious right away. He had done his homework on me, so he had seen stuff and knew that and was very interested. And then we've remained in contact. I try not to bother the guy whenever I hear of stuff going on with To the Stars, or I have questions. As you know from the panels that I've done with you, I've called him and asked him some stuff and gotten some updates so I could come on the panel with some updates from him, and etc. So like I said, I try not to bother the guy. There's been times when he's just called me to ask me stuff or to tell me things. A few things that To the Stars have done before they went public with him, he told me, and maybe within a day or 3 days, let's say, within 72 hours or less, the thing came out or was known, but he made a point to either send me an email or give me a phone call to say, this is gonna break. And that was everything from the original additional pieces of film footage that came out after the first one, the announcement of other pieces of film footage he told me were happening before they did. And then it's continued to, for instance, the Pentagon's announcement of the task force and the Senate report and all these things that came out. He told me a day or two ahead of time before they did.
Has he ever directly confirmed the existence of MILAB operations to you?
He didn't know anything about it, but he's.
Do you think that's true,
I'll
or do
say
you
this
think
is
he
what he
was
says.
pretending not to know anything about it? I mean, 25 years CIA. Might have been trying to
He
pick your
says,
brains.
I'll tell you why I don't think he knew a lot. He did ask around about me and my background. That's why he said he has a piece of evidence for me. Okay. So he used some connections for whatever that was. Right. He is extremely frustrated. He actually wants to come to Sedona and spend, he said, he told me what all he wanted to talk about once on the phone. And I said, well, how many hours do you want? He said, no, I'm thinking more like days, and like sequester me for like 2 days and interrogate, no, well,
that'll be perfect for you.
Yeah. He's on to me, let's just say. Okay. And vice versa, and asked me all about my MILABS research. Of course, anyone out there who's a case of mine, no real case details, certainly no names will ever be shared with him, ever. He knows that. I've made that very clear to him. But he basically said, well, he wants to know more about my own experience anyway. So he said, the 9 military abductions that I believe I've had, and probably 5 or 6 of those where I remember great amounts of detail. He said, can you just tell everything you remember? I'm going to tape it, and etc. And I said, yeah, I'd be willing to do that. Why would I trust him with that? Because if he can come back to me with any information, any verification, any information, it's worth my risk to get that information back. This is what, and he's going to answer questions of mine. This is the agreement. And so we'll have this discussion. I'll ask him some tough questions. He'll ask me about my experiences, and we'll go from there. Maybe I'll get lucky and he'll let me tape it as well. He may not, but I have a good memory, and I have no problem with immediately upon any break or going home in the evening, writing down everything I remember, and like I said, maybe he'll let me tape, but we'll see. So he says, I want to ask you all about your experiences. But in answering more directly what you said, he has a real hard time. See, he was in charge of black budget procurement and the allocation of black budget project funding. He knows a lot about the SAPs, the USAPs, of course. You know, his position with the CIA was very, very at the highest levels. If you think like, you know, there's the director, the assistant director, and then like, I don't know, Jim, you know, he was really high. There's probably a title that goes with that. I just don't know what it is or don't remember. But he did go on about how he was in charge of, like I said, black budgets and the funding and the allocation of funding and the assignment to projects at the deepest levels. And he said he does not understand how the funding for this works, how the reverse engineering program, development of the technology, crash retrievals, MILABS, picking up and questioning abductees, etc. He said, I don't know. And I one day flippantly said to him, well, you know, where do you think all the CIA drug running money is going?
Wow, that was in my head just then as well.
Yeah, yeah.
It comes from
and he,
and
there was a long silence. I know when I strike a nerve with him, because he'll kind of like have this long silence on the phone and then go, well, you know?
Well,
like I could see the gears clicking in his head, like, oh shoot, how do I answer
well,
this?
a lot of people have said this, and I mean, you know, even though we were speaking before about some of the issues we some people have, and you know, myself included, with Greer, that's something that he's spoken about, and other people have spoken about. The idea of the funding mechanisms for this also lead and bleed into the black market, into the cartels, into cocaine, drugs, arms, human trafficking.
Sure.
Which, you know, would if you're going to use, if you need to use completely off the books channels to prioritize your funding, then you're going to have to go to some pretty dark areas. And so it wouldn't surprise me if, you know, things like the war on drugs is in some way being used as a funnel to fund into these programs.
Sure. I mean, there's probably all sorts of black project funding in different sources. Some of them legal, some of them illegal. Him and I have talked a little bit about that. He's very cautious what he says, but I think indirectly he's admitted that, you know, there's some illegal
funding comes from some pretty dodgy places. Have you had any have you been approached by anyone else?
I mean, he's been guarded, you know, but I can say, I think to build a level of trust between us, he's, you know, let his hair down, as you say, you know, a lot of times. And there's times when things have been talked about that he's asked me not to talk about it. But they were minor things, like a little bit about what I just said about the money, stuff like that, a little bit maybe about his and his wife's experience, you know, that kind of stuff. So those times have been very few. Otherwise, I tell him everything else we talk about, I get to share, you know, and if there's anything he doesn't want shared, he better not tell me, you know, and I've made that very clear. So, you know, because I said, look, I'm going to share this unless you specifically say this next part, do not share, you know. And there's only been like 3 times when he's done that at all. And not that I talk to him all the time. We've only had like, I've lost count, 10 or 12 total conversations on the phone, let's say, you know, and usually they're brief, and I'm calling him about something. And a few times he's called me. And then we only met in person that one time when they took me out to lunch.
Right.
And it was about both of our alien abductions, as well as a little bit about my MILAB research. But he has said repeatedly, because that's like been 2 years now or whatever, he said repeatedly he wants, or even 3, no, about 2 years. And maybe going on 3 now, yeah. And he said repeatedly, he said, I want to come out there and I want to spend some time and get the in-depth. I think I'll make the time if he says, you know, I'll put the time aside. I think he's just so busy. Either that, or he's changed his mind and he's decided not to, for whatever reason, you know, not to interview me about it. But he said he still wants to someday. So I suspect maybe he'll come back out here and do that interview about my research with him and my own experiences. Because I've made it clear. I said, look, I'm really not going to share other people's stuff. But he said, no, I just tell me yours. That's good enough. Oh, going back to, you're asking, does he know much about this? He has said, and we've had multiple conversations about this, it frustrates him completely about where the money is going for this and how that happens. He said, look, that was my job. I knew how that worked. He said, I don't know how this works. And I hear the frustration in his voice. And I said, well, the USAPs, and I kind of referenced, we had had a conversation before that was a 43-minute long non-denial about the Wilson document. Okay, the Davis notes. 43-minute non-denial, that's a long time to talk about just about that and come out with a non-denial. Okay. He did not deny its significance or its importance, but denied, like said, we can't comment. To the stars cannot comment.
Yeah, none of them can.
Yeah. But it was a 43-minute conversation. So let's just say it went a long ways as far as saying a 43-minute long, no comments, a long conversation, And basically that was it. It's we can't comment on it. If it says quoting Jim, if it says anything in it that is classified, we can't comment on the entire thing. But he did say it does mention people they know in it repeatedly. And he said those people would rather we not talk about it, So there was, again, it did not deny its significance. It did not deny its authenticity. It did not deny its reality. It just went into basically, bottom line is, can't comment on the specifics. But okay, so getting off on tangents again. Why I brought that up? I'm sorry. I know my mind's like.
You were going to jump back to why you were going to jump back to Jim Semivan and how much he knows about MILABS versus how much he doesn't know. There was a point, and I forgot my point I was making, but it doesn't matter now. Okay, so he was extremely frustrated about where that money goes and how. What I started to say was I brought up things in the document in a later conversation, not the 43-minute one, but like, let's say 5 conversations later, a year later or whatever, I bring up things about it in other conversations that he's, come on, hello, man's not an idiot. He knows what I'm referencing, even though I never said Wilson or Davis or, anything. But I said things like, well, the SAP, Special Access Programs, and the USAPs, unacknowledged Special Access Programs, well, a certain amount of money gets put into these corporate entities to run these programs. And he ended up basically in an indirect way admitting that he knew that happened, And I said, and the CIA drug running and everything. I said, where do you think this money is going? I said, is all of it to just the projects you knew about, the few years you had in that position? And he kind of said, of course not. And I said, there you go. I said, you did this. You tell me, where does that money go? That's me saying to him, you tell me, Jim, how does this work? Where does the money go? I have that question. You're asking me, you're expressing your frustration. How do you think I feel? I'm used by these programs. How does it happen? You tell me how it happens. He said, I wish I knew. And I felt the frustration. Now, is he giving me lip service? Maybe. Of course. But at the same time, I felt like I heard real frustration there. Well, and he said, I'll add this too. He said, those same things, where does the money go? How is it managed? Where's the disconnect in the SAPs, in the funnels, stovepipes, right? Where's the disconnect to how this is managed and controlled and that procurement of money? And he said those same things drive not only him crazy, they drive Chris Mellon crazy. This is what drives Chris Mellon. He said these same things. How can this happen? Well, I think we're
And
dealing with
someone like
people
Jim or
in
Chris Mellon not know the process
I think we're dealing
drives
with
them
people
crazy.
into the Stars Academy who are, deep within the government, but there is this level which is almost, impenetrable unless you are what going to reference the Wilson docs, unless you're on the bigot list, unless you're
Yes.
read into this. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what your clearance level is, what tickets you hold, because I think that Christopher Mellon, Lou Elizondo, Jim Semivan, these individuals are people that have had an extremely accomplished career in what we would consider to be, like in the civilian world, black
Yes.
operations
Yeah,
and
sure.
counter surveillance. But in reality, it's a surface level to a much deeper mechanism that goes deep, deep down, and the
Well,
clearance and the
I
way of
think that's
access becomes murky.
exactly. I think that's what we've learned through this process, and those of us in the community who have personal relationships in some way with the various members of To the Stars, whether that's you and me and Rich Dolan and and Bob McGuire and whoever, everyone's got their people they know. In my case, it's Jim, and then I know some of the others who I've met here and there, well, like Hal, but and John Alexander, et cetera, et cetera. So you go, okay. I want everyone to think I'm not like buying everything I'm told lock, stock, and barrel. Not at all. I have the questions all the time. I ask Jim tough questions. I think that's one of the reasons we have an ongoing conversation is I do ask tough questions. He knows I'm very cautious. He hears these interviews when I do this and say how cautious I am about it. And yet at the same time, I'm good friends with Daniel Sheehan. And I've often said to Dan, do I keep doing this? Do I keep doing this? At what point should I turn and walk the opposite direction? Am I just being used? And, and Dan says, no, keep your foot in the door. I got my foot there jammed in the door. Keep that open communication, because how many times have I been given some useful stuff, like, for instance, Jay, when I'm on the panels and I'm able to share, So as I hear stuff, I'll repeat it. And if I have questions, I can call them and ask them. So I'll keep that open communication. And I'm curious when we sit down and have that MILAB discussion, what is he going to say to me? What evidence does he have with me, for me, that he said he has for me? And will he open up more about it? We'll see. I feel the frustration when he talks about it. I'm left to think, I don't think he knows that much. I think him and Chris are extremely frustrated about it. Like you were just saying, these guys are, there's, when you talk about levels of deep black and levels of involvement, they're not, it's even like my curve, how you can start here and you can have low grade and go all the way up. Well, in that world, there's that curve, and you go, well, okay, well, maybe they have they're in so far, but they're not all the way in. It's compartmentalized. Everyone knows who deals with the conspiracy cover up, whatever you call it, non the era of non-disclosure, before disclosure, it's like you go into, well, it's so compartmentalized that even people in these programs only know the part that they're a part of. I once had a guy involved with MUFON Orange County sit me down once at dinner and explain to me, because he's in black projects, nothing to do with this, but other black projects that are engineering projects. And he tells about, you go in the secure room, the SCIF, the secure vault, you're given just what you need to know. You only get to look at the plans or the paperwork in there, but they don't leave the room when you leave, and it's so frustrating, he told me, because he said, you don't know what the other people know about the project. You don't know what they're working on. It's amazing they ever get anything done when it's handled that way. And that's just secrecy over technology that isn't even UFO related. And you get into this world and it goes even deeper, and so are these guys deeply involved? I mean, Jim once told me the most read in on subject matter related, okay, was Hal Puthoff is the most read in, according to Jim. Okay, and we all know Kit Green was probably really read in on stuff, but you go, okay, at what, and John Alexander, obviously, so you go, okay, but does that mean they're all the way in? Obviously not.
No.
We learn from the Wilson document, the Wilson notes, that Admiral Wilson, his frustration, if that's real, and I believe absolutely, I know you do too. We have enough information. We know people that have done extensive research. We know the whole chain of custody and, all that. So we go into, okay, it stands to reason that Admiral Wilson showed in that interview with Eric how frustrated he was to meet with the lawyers and the heads of this program with the reverse engineering at a major aerospace company. We all kind of think it's probably Lockheed, right? But whoever, okay, that he was shut out, and given his level, second in command at J2, Joint Chiefs of Staff, it's like, wait a second. He said, this is my job to know. And if that's all true, then he was shut out at that level. And this is someone who should have known. So I can understand a Chris or a Jim saying, we're shut out from knowing.
Well, this is the thing. We can even use a known one regarding Harry Reid's request to get ATIP, designated as a unacknowledged, or not even an unacknowledged, just a special access program, just to get SAP privileges, and it was denied. It was denied SAP privileges, which goes to show that even something like ATIP, and perhaps it's the precursor, which was ORSAP. These weren't even special access programs. This is like right at the top of the iceberg, and there is a way bigger core going all the way down. So I think that people, and this is when we have articles like the New York Times story that came out, even though it wasn't overly revealing, they spoke about the idea that there were crash retrieval programs. And, I think that it's becoming more obvious to people outside of the UFO community as well, in the media and political sector, that could be a reality, that there could be this really deep level of sophistication to the kind of the apparatus, the structure of this.
Sure.
And I think that we're going to get to the point where that's challenged. I do genuinely think that we're gonna arrive at a point where we're challenging governments on this, and I'm wondering what your opinion is on the likelihood of us.
I think we're going there. I had this conversation with some people just recently, both some researchers and then also some people who are on my tours, separate conversations. But in both times it came up with clients and researchers that, wait a second, the way this is going already, that's going to come up. That's, it's like, I know some people like Rich Dolan and others in the field are saying, what if we've just moved the goalpost of disclosure, and this ends up gets to hearings or whatever, but we end up with another Project Blue Book or Condon report or something where it goes so far and they say, well, this is all there is. Well, first off, Jim tells me with To the Stars, those guys, they're going to go back and do more briefings. They did the closed briefings to senators and congressmen that led to the Senate report, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence doing the report and passing the bill, and the bill going to Congress. By the way, I've been meaning to call Jim to say, okay, we've gone past October 1st, which is the beginning of the fiscal year. Was that bill signed by Congress and by the president? I'm guessing it was, and we just haven't heard. I'm guessing, but with the president going into the hospital and everything, was it something he signed there? I don't know. So now I like to leave Jim alone unless I have really good reason to call him. But I think calling him and saying, did it pass Congress? Was it signed by the president? Did it get enacted? Did it start October 1st with 120 days to report back to the Senate? So this is the UAP task force at the Pentagon under the Office of Naval Intelligence reporting to the DNI about what all the intelligence agencies know. And the DNI then completing a report that goes back to the Senate. That 120 days was supposed to begin October 1st. So I got to ask, are we there? Is it postponed? Is it changed? What's going on? Given more time, what are you hearing? Now, he's been clear with me that no one in the Senate and the Congress has any responsibility whatsoever to report back to the stars. But then he says, because we have our connections, so they're hearing, they're hearing. So I'm going to say, what are you hearing? Has all that happened? Are we in the 120 days for them to come back to the Senate about what all the intelligence communities know? And it's not everything UFOs. Everybody knows that. Or if you don't, I'll explain, which is, I think it's going to start with like incursions into military airspace, incursions into military fields of operation, sightings, maybe some landing trace cases, that kind of stuff we'll see. Incursions into aerospace, and into military airspace and military fields of operation may get into crash retrieval stuff. We'll see. And it's supposed to remain public except for a classified annex, right? Jay, you know about this, and hopefully most people listening. If not, I'm trying to think what I could send you guys to be familiar, but you could probably provide a link under this to the report anyways, to the report. And there were these 8 line items in the budget report, which was just an overview of the overall intelligence budget, not the whole thing. But the 8 line items were for the UAP task force, for funding of it, and the reporting back in the 120 days to the Senate. So I got to ask Jim, is all that on track? Did the 120 days or 100? Yeah, I think that's what it is. Did that begin? And what's going on with it?
It might have been 180 days.
Maybe.
So I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I know. 120 or 180, might be 180. But regardless, are we on track for that report to come back to the Senate? And thus, is a report going to Congress too? Is it still supposed to remain a public report with the exception of the classified annex? But he told me the classified annex is only supposed to have like foreign intelligence stuff that goes in the classified annex. The stuff that they can't have it be public because they can't have it go into
like sources
foreign enemies' hands. You don't want the foreign enemies to have it. But everything else is supposed to remain public. So it's a wait and see. But have we begun that process? So I'm going to call him and ask. Because I was hoping to even have that phone call before this so I could say if I found out. But unfortunately, that I've been, as you heard me say before we went on, I've been so busy that hasn't happened. But so he has that 180, 120, whatever it is, days begun. And is that report still supposed to be made public? Because you guys, if that's made public, we're talking media frenzy. Hopefully this COVID thing will end and go away going into next year shortly. Let's all pray for that, of course, hold that energy. And then we're done here, at least in the US with the political race. And so it could be that 100 some odd day report coming out then becomes a media frenzy, and this gets the attention that it so far has been on the back burner because of COVID, the pandemic, the White House, the political race, et cetera, et cetera.
I guess my concerns for the international stage, just because, it's quite phenomenal being a UK citizen and seeing what's happening in America on the news and nothing. Like basically just crickets. There's maybe 1 or 2 reporters,
and that happens both ways. Other stuff happens in the world and other stuff with other governments on this subject, and we don't hear about it. There's some very famous cases of that. So that happens
definitely
worldwide.
But it's just that with this is a unique thing because we've got the admittances from the Navy, the Pentagon, we've got United States Navy pilots, and there's so much that has come out. New York Times stories, and I'm seeing Fox, CNN, ASNBC, all these different channels, and there's nothing on Sky, Channel 4, BBC, ITV, which are our channels. There's nothing. There's maybe 1 20-second video clip on YouTube. And so I'm really, for me, as someone outside of America, I'm just really hoping that we start to see this enter the international stage. And it was Lou Elizondo. Lou Elizondo said on Twitter, I think it was last month or maybe a little bit further back, but he said that he said something along the lines of the first phase has been successful and our American political system is responding, blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera. And now it's time for the second phase, for the international stage. So yes. I hope that's not just, talk, and I hope that they do actually have some form of templated plan to start bringing this out, because I want to, it's very difficult. I mean, obviously I've got the news reports we can send people, but it's difficult having conversations with people in this country about it because so many people have no idea. At least in America, most people have gone, oh yeah, I saw that on the news. I've seen something about these pilots. Yeah. Here, there's nothing. So everyone's just walking around like not
It's funny you should say that, and I agree, and it's a shame that you're not getting coverage. But when that report comes out and it
Yeah,
gets a
I
little more
hope.
media attention here, I would think then your
I
media would
really
pick
hope
it up,
so. I really hope
you
so,
know.
Melinda.
And hey, if they don't right away, and it gets published on this end, that report will show up. The To the Stars guys will have it, out on the internet, on Reddit or something, and then in which case, definitely make a point to contact all your local media
100%.
there
Yeah, yeah.
and get it in front of them, even if you got to print it out and hand it to them in person. Get it to your local media, get it to your local political people, and and make them address it, because
No, I totally
I think
agree.
that report will get picked up by your media. I would think, if it makes our media here.
Yeah, I really do hope so. I really do hope so.
Yeah.
What we're coming up to, I think we've got about 8 minutes until the Zoom meeting actually cancels automatically because it's
Oh,
going to go
okay.
off there. So we're 8 minutes on the clock, Melinda.
Oh,
And there's one thing that I asked you, but we kind of went around
okay.
in a little
I
bit.
do
So
that.
it's fine. But I think it's a good thing to kind of finish up on is, what do you personally think, at least to some extent? I don't expect you to have a full-on explanation, but to whatever extent that you feel you can explain it, what do you think that the reasons for MILAB
Sure,
abductions are?
sure. Well, I know what I say in my research and my research presentations when I give lectures on the subject, is that they're predominantly interested in 5 things. So if I can remember what they are off the top of my head, no notes in front of me, you guys, top of my head. Okay. The covert human guys are interested in the alien agenda and motive. So they'll interrogate the abductees, what we know about alien agenda, alien motives. What are the aliens doing? Why are they doing it? Certainly why the hybridization program, because that's the root of abductions, is still the taking of ovum from women, sperm from men, and producing hybrids. And what, the whole total picture in that. So that's number one. Number two is the obvious offshoot of that, which is the hybridization program and abductees' DNA. We know that the To the Stars guys and their extended group that Jim has always, told me, it's like 40 people or more, okay, involves Gary Nolan and Kit
Yeah,
Green
like the
and et cetera, et
genomics and the
cetera.
geneticism. Yeah.
Yeah, the geneticists doing the work there, and the DNA analysis and everything that they're doing. Why do they have an interest in that? And abductees, and because they're getting it from a lot of abductees and people with close contact experiences, close range sightings, close range landing cases, where their physiology maybe has been affected by close contact, okay, and abductees, contactees, all the above. So they're working with those individuals, and I know a number of abductees that have worked with them and provided that for them. I mean, I could probably think of at least 10 people off the top of my head, maybe 20, that I know who have done that. I have not, but Jim asked me at some point, he said, we would like to do that with you. And I have said yes, but it has not happened. Whatever, I think they've just been so busy, whatever, but he says we'd like to. Okay. I mean, I don't care if they have a DNA sample. I mean, I'm already MILAB case. Those guys already have it. Might as well give it. Might as well give it to these guys too. What
yeah,
the hell?
yeah.
Okay. Seriously. Okay. So again, alien agenda motives, DNA, genetics, have we been affected or changed from our abductions? Have the ETs affected or changed us? Are we hybrids ourselves? All that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 is psychic abilities. Have you been affected or changed by your experiences? If you had psychic training, do you have abilities? It's well known, it's a chicken or egg question amongst abductees, which came first, the psychic or the abductee? Okay, so that. I usually put this next one last, but I'll put the major one last, because the major one is the main reason. So so again, psi abilities. Do you have paranormal functioning? Are you able to remote view? Do you do telekinesis, psychokinesis? Can you manipulate matter? Do you read minds, et cetera, et cetera? And if you're really good at that, you might be getting recruited into some programs, okay? One such person super soldier recruited into programs, was an abductee, contactee. He does talk about this, is Lynn Buchanan, famous remote viewer. You guys, the remote viewing military program is a super soldier program. Hello. That, you know, it's one aspect. And there are many, many people involved and still involved in that in a covert manner, aside from the part that they threw, you know, bone to the public and had the military unit in. It went on in other places, duh, you know, okay. But Lynn was recruited. They knew his contactee abductee, had psychic abilities, and had psychokinesis abilities, which they were extremely interested in. And then got recruited into the remote viewing program. So anyway, so that's the psi part. The next one is practice and development of mind control, that they use us for practicing, developing mind control. Like I said, they have it down to a science. Are we guinea pigs in that way too? Yeah. You know, and so that's how they can repress the memory. That's how they can get you to, you know, do things, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, it's drugs, fear. Let's start with drugs, hypnosis, fear, intimidation, and occasionally pain inducement. And they can use those things to repress memory or to splinter the memory. So you have like a personality A, personality B situation. And that's something that they've done in these events. And so not only do they get to use breakthrough stuff on us, but they can probably use the responses in our physiology and, you know, medical stuff to perfect that, you know, in some way. So the whole development, practice, and use of mind control. Okay. And then fifth, last but not least, I don't want to run out of time here.
We have about a minute and a half.
And this is the major part, which is the technology. Abductees have flown ships. They've been shown how the navigation, propulsion system, and other extraterrestrial technology works. They've had hands-on with the extraterrestrial technology. It is really common for alien abductees to say, I flew the ship. And by the way, that's all, and you're going to love this, it's all consciousness. It's all with the mind. You have to remote view a location for the ship to go there. It follows what your mind. The ship becomes an extension of the physical reality, the physical body of the ETs, of the abductee. It responds to you physically, it responds to your thoughts, and it responds to your psychic ability. It's all, everything is consciousness, but the technology of the ETs is all consciousness based. You know, we talk about CE5s and bringing them in. I always tell my clients, even though I don't use any CE5 protocols per se, I tell my clients on my tours, what you say and think absolutely matters. Think, bring it in. Visualize bringing it in. Say out loud. Flash at us. We flash at things with lasers. We get them flashing back. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it's all consciousness interaction, and that's how the technology works. Abductees know this. Abductees experience that interaction with the technology, it becoming an extension of them on board in their abduction. They think stuff, it does things, they react, they're shown how to fly ships. Then they're given information like Stan Romanek was, extensive mathematical formulas on his walls. But by the way, the Pentagon took extreme interest in. Okay, we know that through connections to the Pentagon, who said we were studying his stuff. So mathematical formulas, equations, alphabets, language. So all those things that I put in the technology category. These guys who are developing reverse engineering the technology also need people who are able to fly the stuff and operate it. Yeah, can they train people, but they can also recruit people who've had previous contact experiences. They need people who interact with the ETs and communicate with them. Abductees are able to interact and communicate because of that consciousness and do the telepathy with the ETs as a byproduct of our experience. Abductees get recruited into programs as ET communicators. There's some very famous cases of this. A gentleman who wrote the book Above Black, okay? His name is escaping me right now, and I'll think of it in a second. But he wrote that book, and it's about being sat at a computer, and he was put in a position to interact and communicate with the ETs, and while in the military. So he was recruited into that. Well, he also talks in that book, he was an abductee contactee before that. So, you know, and Lorianne and her super soldiers have multiple guys who've been put in an ET communication role. Many abductees say in their MILAB events, they're put in an ET communication role. There's some other famous whistleblowers and insiders who claim that that's the role they were put into, like Dan Burrish, who says I was put in that role, as well as others. So that's the other thing. That's a part of the technology. It's can you communicate and interface with the ETs and their technology? One of my MILABs, I was specifically asked, and I go into this more in depth because we don't have the time here, in my interview with Lorianne, which you'll put a link to below. Did you get a chance to hear that? At the very end, I go into this experience. Unfortunately, we almost ran out of time, but it goes into that interface, and I talk about being shown a piece of technology by the ETs that the military on a previous experience had asked me to remember. And then they put me in this deep altered state and had me recall the additional piece of that technology. They had part of it drawn on like graph paper, and they wanted me to remember the other part, like the unknown part. And apparently I did, and I drew it. And they all like congratulated me and everything in the experience. I don't remember everything that it was. They had to use so much drugs and hypnosis and stuff to get me in that state of mind and fear to access that part of me, that they recalled that it took me at least 8 and probably about 10 regressions to get through remembering that, even that part of that experience, because then they went about trying to repress the memory in me through an extremely fear-inducing, pain-inducing situation. So I don't go into detail about that but I give a quick overview. But they did have me draw this piece of technology when they were interrogating me about alien technology. So that's one thing they wanted from me. And other abductees share this same thing. They asked me, I'm going to quote a bunch of abductees I've worked with in my, over 100 people. One of them said, or more than one. I've heard this from more than one. They've said they wanted me to spy on the technology. They wanted me to spy on the technology and remember certain alien technology should I get shown it or shown it again. And they said they want me to remember that so that they can the military can abduct me again, and I will recall that piece of technology. So I'm not the only one by any means who's had that happen.
Well, I think we're going to have to cut it there because we're just getting a little bit past the time, but it is still recording. So it has, I thought it might automatically stop recording, but it seems to be going all right. But okay. Melinda, that was absolutely fantastic. We've been going for, I think, just over 2.5 hours. And it's been absolutely fascinating. So I just want to say thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I wanted to set things straight about some of these negative concepts out there about MILABs. Again, I've never come up with any of my research or cases, and any of the major abduction researchers and people I work with, I've never heard a single one say that they were perpetrating or hoaxing a faked ET abduction.
Right, yeah,
never,
okay.
Never. And as well as, it's a very complex thing, and they want to know those 5 things I just covered. They want to know those from the abductees. So that is their interest in us for those reasons. And we become another data source. When you do intelligence work, you have what's called human intelligence work, right? That's gathering information from humans and research. And then you have like signals intelligence, which is all the electronic stuff. Well, they've learned, those managing this subject apparently have found that abductees are another source of information, that we've had so much direct hands-on with the ETs that they can learn stuff that they don't know. Yes, I haven't really covered this, but in these experiences, in these underground bases, it's very common to see ETs and military personnel working together. It's not all of them. And just because they have some limited interaction with them doesn't mean they're getting all the information from them. So whatever they're not getting directly from the ETs, maybe they're getting from us.
Well, I know that you could go for another 2 hours or 3 hours, Melinda, and we probably would need to cover this because, again, just like the UFO topic in general, this is, a multifaceted subject. There's a lot to talk about. There's not, you can't cover all of it in 2.5, 3 hours, but I think we've done a good job at just kind of giving a good overall general idea for someone who hasn't heard of MILAB and isn't quite familiar with it. So yeah, thank you so much
You're
for
very
coming
welcome.
on and taking
Thank
the
you for
time.
having me.
Oh, you're
I
most welcome.
appreciate it, and giving me the opportunity to set some people straight on what this is and what this isn't,
Yeah.
and and share some facts, clarify my relationship with Semivan, which I know you wanted to do, and etc. And we also got a little Wilson document stuff in there, so
Yeah.
we covered a
We've covered
lot.
a few
Yeah,
different things
but
here.
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And and for more, that other 2 interviews, the one I did with the other women that I talked about, that panel with the women, and my other interview for Lorianne, will link down below.
Yeah, we'll be
So if
linking
people
those in the description box.
more, and maybe some links to my other research lectures that I've done,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because there's a lot more, and in 2.5 hours here, we barely scratched the surface. So if you're interested in more, there's more there. And we get, my panel with the other girls is all about experiences. So this was more about research. If you want to hear the experiences, you can listen to that.
There we go. So everything will be in the description box below, guys. So yeah, make sure you check out the rest of Melinda's work.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And everybody go watch The Phenomenon. I watched half of it today. It came out today, James Fox's new movie. I only saw half, but the half I saw was incredible. I can't wait to see the rest, which I will tonight.
Yep, I'm going to be watching it tomorrow night, so I'm very excited.
Awesome. And I think you and I are going to be on another disclosure panel coming up talking about that.
Yep, no doubt.
This week. I think that's this weekend, if I remember correctly. So I'll see you then.
You will see me then, Melinda. All right. Awesome. Well, until then, take care of yourself.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me.